Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a place where oak groans, tar warms in the lantern glow, and ropes creak like tired giants stretching their limbs. You stand at the very edge of Portsmouth's historic dockyard, staring up at a wall of wood rising stories above you, HMS Victory, an 18th century warship so massive, so intricate, and so stubbornly alive that you're already thinking, wow, I probably won't survive this. And honestly, fair. Men back then barely survived it either. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone is drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge up the slanted gangway toward the looming hull, the planks beneath your feet solid but slightly springy as if testing you. The air smells of salt, pitch, and the faint sweetness of old timber, the kind that's seen storms, starvation, glory, and probably more spilled rum than the entire Caribbean. When you finally place a hand on the hull, it's warmer than you expect, almost like skin, and the ship seems to lean ever so slightly, acknowledging your arrival. Stepping onto the deck, you're hit by a rush of sensory noise, the slow clunk of the tide nudging wood, the distant cries of gulls, the slap of rigging cords against the masts. Everything sways, not dramatically, just enough to remind you that you're standing on a machine designed to move endlessly. This deck once carried Admiral Nelson himself, pacing with a cool confidence historians still argue whether he actually felt or just pretended to feel for morale. Either way, he walked right where your shoes are now. No pressure. A sailor brushes past you. Well, not a real one, just your imagination doing its job, and you picture him wearing the classic blue jacket and white breeches of the Royal Navy. But here's the quirky bit. Sailors weren't issued uniforms until later. Many wore whatever they owned, which is why early naval paintings look like a chaotic thrift store fashion show. Still, your mind fills with the energy of those long-gone footsteps, the scent of pipe smoke, the clatter of tools. You're walking into history, but it isn't still. It vibrates gently with every memory. You glance down the length of the deck, noticing how impossibly long the ship feels. Victory stretches about 186 feet, longer than many modern school buildings, and she held a crew of roughly 800 men, though held might be generous, more like packed, squeezed, or crammed with hopes, sweat, and zero privacy whatsoever. The space you stand on is elegant and open, but it's a trick. Below this deck, claustrophobia's multi-level theme park. A shadow falls over you as you move toward the bow, where the ship narrows like a blade. The bowsprit juts out above you at a dramatic angle, basically a giant wooden spear pointing toward whatever trouble the crew plan to find. You stare up at the figurehead, an ornate carving of a crowned warrior, bold and watchful. It's meant to protect the ship, though historians still argue whether sailors actually believed the figureheads were magical, or whether they were more like historical mascots. Personally, you get mascot vibes. But you also wouldn't want to anger this one. Those carved eyes follow you a bit too convincingly. The planks beneath your boots have grooves worn in by thousands of marching feet. You kneel and run your fingers across one, smooth, polished by friction, storms, and time. You imagine the deck swabbing, men down on their hands and knees sloshing seawater and sand across the boards. It sounds medieval, but that gritty mix helped keep the wood clean, and weirdly enough protected it. A sailor back then would probably side-eye your fancy sneakers and say something like, "Aye lad, the deck'll eat those alive." He's not wrong. You drift toward the starboard rail where the open sea once sprawled endlessly. Tonight, it's a quiet dock, but you lean forward anyway, letting your mind pull you into the past. Picture the water dark and rolling, sails swelling overhead, cannons thundering in the distance. On this ship, the Battle of Trafalgar unfolded, one of history's most famous naval battles. That's a mainstream historical fact people love quoting, but here's a softer one. The men slept, ate, fought, and dreamed, all within the same wooden walls. The ship didn't just carry them, it consumed their entire world. A gust brushes your face, maybe real, maybe just the fan in your room doing its job. But you lift your chin and breathe in the imagined ocean. This is the moment when the ship begins to feel less like a museum piece and more like a living thing. Wooden hulls absorb moisture, stretch, shrink, and exhale. Sailors joked that their ships were temperamental ladies, with moods that changed by the hour. Quirky, yes, but also true. The ship groans now, a long, low creak like a sleepy giant settling under blankets. You start walking aft, feeling how the deck subtly rises toward the quarterdeck. Officers once stood here, giving orders that might mean life or death for hundreds. Their voices carried power and occasionally sarcasm. Naval logs from the era include surprisingly snarky remarks, like one officer complaining that inexperienced sailors couldn't find the wind with both hands and a printed map. You smile. Humanity hasn't changed much. But among all this charm and nostalgia, you get that tiny cold pinprick of reality. Life aboard was brutally hard. Disease loved tight quarters, and accidents were constant. Even here, on deck, slipping on a wet plank could send someone straight overboard, usually with no way to rescue them. You grip the railing instinctively. The ship sways again, and you understand why people prayed before voyages. Still, there's a strange coziness to it. The way the lantern light softens the shadows, the gentle roll under your feet, the idea of so many stories layered into every board. You're not just visiting history, you're stepping into it, feeling the weight, the warmth, and the whisper of every life that passed through this space. Your journey is only beginning, but already the ship has wrapped you in its slow, rhythmic motion, pulling you deeper into its world, and you keep moving, curiosity nudging you toward the dim stairway leading below deck, where the air thickens and the real heart of the ship waits. You ease yourself toward the narrow hatchway, and the moment you step onto the ladder, the light changes. It thickens. Warmer, dimmer, almost syrupy. The deck above slips away, and now you're moving down into the ship's lungs, where the air grows still and the shadows settle like sleepy cats. The ladder is steep enough that you cling to the rails, boots feeling for each rung as the wood sighs under your weight. Good start. You haven't bonked your head yet, which already puts you ahead of most 18th century sailors. Your boots land on the lower deck with a muted thunk. The ceiling, or technically the deck above, is so low you could give it a friendly little headbutt if you straightened up too fast. You stay crouched, ducking instinctively, your shoulders rounding as the ship's tight embrace closes around you. The smell changes too, richer, humid, full of rope fibers, sweat, tar, and centuries of stories that never got the memo they were supposed to fade. Your eyes adjust slowly. Hammocks sway everywhere, hundreds of them, barely an arm's width apart. Each one hangs from thick hooks, gently rocking with the ship's motion, as if they're breathing in unison. Even empty, they feel inhabited. You reach out and brush one with your fingertips. The coarse canvas whispers against your skin. A quirky fact. Sailors often slept in their clothes because laundry wasn't exactly a thriving department aboard. Plus, hammocks were shared. One man's sleep spot became another's once shifts changed. You try not to think too hard about that. You inch forward, stepping sideways like you're in a crowded subway car that someone forgot to build properly. The deck slopes slightly, and you feel the ship's own heartbeat in the constant slow creak of timbers shifting under pressure. Historians still argue whether the creaking noises were comforting to sailors or the kind of sound that keeps you wide awake wondering if the hull is planning to split open. You suspect the answer is both. You duck under a beam, you're getting good at this, and shuffle deeper into the dimness. Lanterns swing on their hooks, casting soft golden arcs across the deck. Imagine nighttime here, where nearly 500 men would be packed in together, breathing, snoring, turning, whispering. The heat alone could have powered a small sauna. You pause, lifting your hand to feel the warmth of the lantern's glow, and picture that humidity pressing against your skin until sleep feels like a negotiation. A sailor would tell you the worst part wasn't the heat, it was the smell. Between sweat, wet wool, unwashed bodies, and the occasional rat that thought it owned the place. Aroma is a generous word. One fringe tidbit sailors swore by, hanging open onions around the sleeping area to absorb foul air. Does it work? Absolutely not, but hope is free and onions were cheap. You move toward a long wooden table bolted to the deck. Above it hangs a row of utensils, spoons, bowls, and the occasional tin mug that probably had more dents than metal. Mealtimes happened here, usually featuring a delightful menu of salted pork, hardtack biscuits, and peas that had aspirations of becoming rocks. You tap one of the benches, imagining the clatter of tin plates and the hungry chatter of men whose diet was basically chew, swallow, hope for the best. Your hand grazes a low beam again. You swear the beams are getting lower. You're tall by 18th century standards, which means this entire deck is basically a series of forehead traps waiting to ambush you. Back then, sailors were generally shorter, more compact, and more accustomed to ducking under beams with a speed that screams, "I've suffered enough concussions for one lifetime." The deeper you go, the more the ship tightens around you. Walls narrow, shadows thicken, hammocks multiply. Each one represents a life, a story, a man who lived in this floating wooden neighborhood. The ship feels alive here, its breath warm, close, and steady. You pause and look up at a small square opening in the deck above, the hatch used to pass food, gear, sometimes even injured men. You imagine the muffled thud of boots overhead, the shouts of orders drifting down like echoes from a dream. For a moment, the line between past and present thins enough that you swear you hear them. Your fingers trail across a stack of barrels lashed tightly against the wall. Water, rum, flour, maybe some gunpowder stored carefully nearby. Every barrel is essential, every rope holding them in place part of a delicate dance between safety and disaster. On rolling seas, a loose barrel could turn into a deadly bowling ball with no regard for human bones. You step past it, mind wandering briefly. Imagine trying to sleep down here during a storm, the hammock swinging violently, lanterns jerking, barrels groaning, men muttering prayers into the dark. You probably wouldn't survive that either, but hey, at least you'd have the world's worst rocking cradle. As you continue, you brush past a rope line that runs along the ceiling. The jackstay, something sailors grabbed during rough seas. You wrap your hand around it and feel the scratchy texture of the fibers, the small knots that once held desperate fingers. The ship rolled. The men clung. Some held on, some didn't. You shift sideways into a quieter pocket of the deck where the swaying hammocks give way to a small fenced-off area. This was where the Marines slept. Yes, Marines. The Royal Navy placed Marines on ships partly for boarding actions and partly to look intimidating during mealtime disagreements. Their hammocks were spaced slightly farther apart, a tiny perk of being the ship's built-in security team. You lean against a beam and listen. The ship whispers. Every wood fibre seems to hum with memory. And then you catch a faint scratching sound overhead. In your imagination, it's a rat with impeccable timing. Realistically, could have been. Rats were everywhere on ships, scurrying across beams, nibbling at hardtack, occasionally falling asleep in sailors' boots because those were, tragically, warm. You keep moving until your fingers find a thick vertical post. One of the ship's massive frames, part of the ribs that hold the structure together. You rest your palm there, feeling its solidity. The mainstream historical fact here. This deck, this cramped, dark, low-ceilinged space, is where sailors spent most of their lives. More than on the open deck, more than in battle. This was home. A lantern flickers, the deck creaks. You breathe in deeply, and the ship breathes with you. You turn now toward another ladder leading even deeper into the heart of the hull. The darkness ahead feels heavier, thicker, like warm night air waiting to wrap itself around you. But you step forward anyway, because down there, the ship reveals even more secrets. You ease yourself down the next ladder and the air grows warmer, thicker, almost velvety with the scent of wood, metal, and slow-burning lantern oil. The moment your boots hit the deck, you feel it. This isn't just another cramped level. This is the gun deck, the long wooden cathedral where HMS Victory roared louder than thunder itself. The ceiling is low enough to make your neck instinctively bend, the floor smooth from centuries of pacing feet, and everything smells faintly of iron and powder, as if the ship remembers battle better than peace. You straighten cautiously, moving between rows of massive cannons, elegant beasts with round iron snouts pointed through open gun ports. Even silent, they carry a kind of presence that makes you slow your breathing. You rest a hand on the nearest one, and the cold metal sends a tiny shiver up your arm. The cannon is called a 32-pounder, meaning it hurled iron balls the size of small melons with enough force to punch through hulls like they were soggy cardboard. Mainstream fact, Victory carried 104 guns in total, and these, right here, were among her deadliest. But here's the quirky detail sailors love to share. Every cannon had a name. Not official names, just whatever the gun crew felt like calling theirs. Thunderlass, Old Belcher, Widowmaker, Susan. Yes, Susan. Historians still argue whether naming guns actually boosted morale, or was just a way for bored sailors to give personality to the things that could explode in their faces at any moment. Maybe both. You pat your cannon anyway, because you're polite like that. A lantern sways overhead, painting slow arcs of amber light across the polished barrels. They seem to glow, purring softly as the ship rocks. You can almost hear the rhythm of a firing drill. The shouted commands, the scraping of rammers, the thud of powder cartridges shoved home. The gun deck wasn't just a workspace, it was a choreography. A muscular, smoky ballet performed by sweating, half-deaf, exhausted men who had exactly zero margin for error. You step sideways to the gun port, leaning out into the cool air spilling in from the outside world. The port looks harmless now, just a large square opening with a heavy wooden shutter tied up overhead. But picture this during battle. Men clustered here, breathing hard, ears ringing, eyes stinging from gunpowder smoke. You push your face slightly outward, imagining the ocean spray, the screams, the cannons flash, bleaching everything white. Even now, the deck under your feet feels like it's bracing for impact. You keep moving, navigating around ropes that loop like sleepy snakes on the deck. Each cannon is tied down with a heavy system of breaching ropes, thick, tar-soaked lines meant to stop the gun from recoiling across the deck and flattening anyone unlucky enough to be in its path. You tap one and feel how stiff it is, as if the fibres are still holding tension from centuries-old battles. A dip in the deck catches your toe, and you steady yourself with a hand on a wooden beam. You glance down at the small trough carved beneath each cannon's wheels, a channel used to catch and drain the gun's rinse water after cleaning. Sailors cleaned their guns constantly, like anxious new owners polishing a sports car they couldn't actually drive until someone tried to kill them. Daily maintenance wasn't optional, it was survival. You take a few careful steps toward the centre of the gun deck where the space opens slightly. Here, you find a long table with metal tools, powder horns, and wooden-handled rammers. You trail your fingers over each item, imagining the crew scrambling around them in a frenzy during battle. One practical, somewhat absurd tidbit you might appreciate. The Navy required men to shave before combat. Not for appearance, though who doesn't want to look sharp while being shot at, but because loose facial hair increased the risk of gunpowder sparks catching. Nothing ruins your day faster than your beard spontaneously combusting. You lift a small cylindrical object, a powder cartridge wrapped in flannel in your imagination, and picture passing these hand to hand, like the world's most dangerous assembly line. Historians still argue whether powder boys, some as young as 12, were chosen for their size, bravery, or simply because nobody else wanted to run through a smoky chaos carrying explosives. You picture one darting past you now, barefoot, fast, ghost-like. You turn toward another cannon. Its wooden wheels rest in deep grooves worn into the deck from years of recoil. You kneel and drag your fingers along the indentations. They aren't just marks, they're scars, evidence of constant movement. This ship didn't merely survive battles. It fired so many guns for so many years that the floor itself changed shape. Another lantern flickers, and you catch a glimpse of the gun crew positions chalked faintly on the bulkhead. A training aid. You imagine 10 or 12 men around each gun, each one responsible for a single motion that must be timed perfectly. One mistake, boom, or worse, no boom, which is somehow even scarier in battle. A joke sailors muttered nervously, "If it doesn't fire, check if you're already dead." You walk a little farther and notice the deck slopes gently upward at the stern. The air shifts, cooler, carrying faint ocean notes through an open port. You take a deep breath, and the ship exhales with a soft creak. Beneath your palm, the wooden frame feels warm from countless hands before yours. The ship, in this moment, feels like a giant animal curled around you, protective, patient, but unpredictable. You slide a finger along the cannon's touch hole, the tiny opening where a glowing match once sparked explosives inside. It's scuffed and blackened, a reminder of how many times this gun spat fire into the world. The very idea of standing here during combat makes your pulse quicken. Men were deafened for hours, the entire deck filled with choking smoke. Splinters, sharp as daggers, flew like angry bees whenever enemy shots smashed through the hull. And you'd probably have fainted 3 minutes in. But don't worry, several historical accounts mention sailors fainting, vomiting, or briefly reconsidering every life choice that led them onto a warship. You'd have fit right in. You continue down the aisle, weaving between cannons that feel like silent, patient guardians. The deeper you go, the more you sense how crucial this space was. The gun deck wasn't just hardware, it was identity, pride, purpose. This was where the ship spoke. Finally, you pause at the far end of the deck, feeling its weight settle on your shoulders. You're surrounded by metal, wood, rope, and echoes of thunder that never truly fade. And somewhere below you, even darker spaces wait. Places where the ship's very bones twist and breathe, time to keep moving. You move deeper still, feeling the deck tilt ever so slightly beneath your feet as the ship settles into its nighttime breathing. Slow, steady, and almost soothing if you don't think too hard about the tons of wood flexing like a living ribcage around you. The air shifts again, thicker and more resin-scented, and when your boots touch the next level down, the space suddenly feels ancient. You've stepped into the heart of the hull, the ship's bones, its wooden skeleton, its hidden architecture that holds everything else together. You pause, letting your eyes adjust. Here, lantern light doesn't bounce playfully the way it did above. It clings to the curved beams overhead, melting into the shadows like warm honey. The ceiling arches low, formed by massive ribs of oak bent into shape during construction. Each rib is thick as your torso, smoothed by time yet still bearing faint tool marks from the shipwrights who shaped them in Portsmouth over 250 years ago. You rest a hand on one rib, and the wood is surprisingly warm, like it's storing centuries of sunlight. A mainstream historical fact settles quietly into your mind. HMS Victory was built with over 6,000 trees, mostly English oak, but also elm, pine, fir, and even a bit of pitch pine imported from the Baltics. Imagine that number, an entire forest transformed into one immense floating war machine. You run your fingertips along the beam again, and it feels like touching the ghost of a tree that got a really dramatic second career. As you continue forward, you duck beneath crossbeams so low, you begin to suspect the ship is politely trying to teach you better posture. The walls curve inward, embracing you with a closeness you didn't expect. This is where the hull thickens, up to 2 feet of layered planking in some areas. It's why Victory survived battles that pulverized lesser ships. Though to be fair, historians still argue whether her survival was due more to her sturdy hull, or her crew's chaotic mixture of skill, luck, and occasional "please don't let me die today" desperation. You move slowly along a narrow passage, stepping over coiled ropes, wooden buckets, and bundles of spare timber called ship stores. Everything smells of tar and resin, a scent sailors called the perfume of the sea. You take a breath and immediately decide it's more Grandpa's shed than perfume, but hey, romance is subjective. You stop at a large vertical beam, one of the main supporting frames. You lay your palm on it and feel the faint tremor of the ship adjusting to its moorings. Wooden ships weren't rigid. They moved constantly, flexing with waves, storms, and even temperature changes. Sailors claimed the hull worked, meaning it shifted subtly, whispering and creaking like an old house with commitment issues. Shipwrights, meanwhile, called this flexibility necessary, though they probably muttered less polite phrases under their breath when repairs got complicated. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. During construction, shipwrights used a surprising amount of animal products: horsehair mixed with tar, sheep tallow for lubrication, and even dried cow dung added to certain caulking mixtures to make them stickier. You look at the ceiling, suddenly imagining a shipyard worker proudly announcing that cow poop is, in fact, structural. You whisper a quiet "thank you" to the long-departed cows. You shuffle forward until you reach a narrow space where lanterns hang from pegs driven directly into the ribs. The shadows ripple as the lanterns sway, highlighting the hull's graceful curves. The ship's interior doesn't feel built, it feels grown, organic, smooth but powerful, like you've stepped inside the ribcage of some gigantic whale. A whale with cannons and questionable labor practices, but still. You crouch and peer through a small window-like opening in the framework. Beyond it lies the lower hold, a deeper, darker domain where supplies were stored. Barrels stacked in towering rows, rope coils as thick as your wrist, spare sails folded like enormous sleeping bats. You can almost hear the quiet slosh of water in the casks, the rustle of cloth, the mute thump of barrels settling during rough seas. And just imagine, in battle, this deck became the unintended morgue, the wounded waiting for the surgeon, the unlucky stored until the fighting stopped. But you keep those thoughts soft like shadows drifting past. The ship creaks under you, long, deep, and resonant. You tilt your head and listen. It's not a scary sound, more like the ship stretching her joints after a long day. Sailors often said each ship had her own voice, and the Victory's was low, confident, almost proud. You run your fingers along another rib, feeling the vibration through the wood. This is a ship that has outlived empires, outlived wars, outlived every man who ever stepped upon her deck. That kind of longevity comes with attitude. Farther in, you find a stack of thin wooden boards, planking used for repairs. Their edges are smooth, and you drag your fingertip along one, imagining the shipwrights at work. Steam rising from water-soaked timber, men swinging mallets and adzes, sparks of sawdust drifting in sunbeams like tiny golden snowflakes. The building of a ship wasn't just construction, it was craftsmanship so precise that modern carpenters still study the techniques like ancient spells. And here comes the scholarly debate for this section. Historians still argue whether the hull design of ships like Victory was optimized through deliberate engineering genius or through centuries of messy trial and error that just happened to produce something miraculous. You suspect both. Humans rarely advance without accidents, arguments, and someone shouting, "Well, let's try it and hope the ship doesn't sink." You duck under another beam, nearly grazing it with your hair, and step into a slightly wider space. This is where the knees of the ship sit, L-shaped wooden brackets that brace the beams overhead. They're massive, carved from single pieces of timber to ensure strength. You lay a hand on one and feel the sturdiness radiate up your arm. These knees held the deck above in violent storms, absorbing impacts that would have shattered weaker ships. You crouch again because the ceiling dips, almost daring you to test your skull's durability. The lower you move, the more the ship seems to hug the earth, curving gently inward like the belly of a resting creature. The lantern light fades behind you, and you lift another hanging lamp from a hook, carrying it forward into deeper shadows. The faint glow reveals yet more ribs, more beams, more gentle curves, every inch humming with the memory of ocean waves. You pause, realizing something. The ship doesn't just have structure, it has rhythm, a pulse, a slow, ancient cadence that you can almost feel syncing with your own breath. In this quiet hollow of the hull, far from sunlight and cannons, you feel something unexpected. Comfort. As if the ship, with her thick wooden bones and soft groans, is letting you glimpse her most intimate self. A place built not for glory or destruction, but simply to endure. You take one more step forward, deeper into the warm shadows, ready to discover the towering world that rises above this wooden heart. You lift your lantern a little higher, and the glow spills upward into the dimness, catching on ropes and wooden beams that stretch toward the deck above like veins in a giant sleeping creature. You feel the ship's belly tighten and rise subtly beneath your feet. She's inhaling, and you follow the breath upward, toward a ladder that leads out of the warm ribs of the hull and into brighter, sharper air. When you climb back up to the main deck, the space feels suddenly enormous, like you've stepped out of a cave and into a cathedral made of rope and sky. Your eyes lift almost automatically. Because how could they not? Above you rises a forest. No, a skyscraper forest. Of masts, spars, rigging lines, and blocks crisscrossing in a dizzying web. The towering masts seem to pierce the clouds, their tops swaying with a slow confidence that makes your stomach do a small, nervous somersault. These aren't just tall. They're absurdly tall. The mainmast soars nearly 220 feet high, taller than many modern apartment buildings, built from multiple massive pine trunks, spliced together into one impossibly straight spear. You tilt your head farther back until your neck protests. The rigging, so many lines, so many knots, looks like the world's most ambitious spiderweb designed by someone who clearly hated beginners, And guess what? You're climbing it. Well, if you were actually a sailor. The moment you imagine yourself halfway up that web of ropes with nothing beneath you but air and regret, your palms get sweaty. Sailors scampered up the rigging barefoot in storms, at night, half asleep, half fed, and often half sure they wouldn't survive. The modern Navy would have a field day with the safety violations here. You approach the base of the main shrouds, the vertical ladder-like rigging that leads upward. The ropes are thick, rough, and tarred black. They smell sharp and earthy, like ancient forests dipped in coffee. You grip one, testing its texture. The tar sticks faintly to your fingertips, a reminder of how sailors' clothes were perpetually stained, stiff, and, let's call it textured. You take one step upward, not a real climb, just enough to feel how the ropes give slightly under your weight. The ship rolls gently, and even this tiny shift makes your balance wobble. You step back down immediately, pretending you meant to do that. Totally intentional. Great job. A faint breeze brushes your cheek, carrying the snap of canvas above. You glance upward again, noticing the great yardarms, horizontal spars that hold the sails, stretching outward like the wings of some colossal wooden creature. Each one is so long you imagine a sailor walking its length, with only a single rope to hold, the wind whipping at his clothes, the ocean yawning far below. Yet that's exactly what they did. Daily. Cheerfully, if contemporary drawings are to be believed, though historians still argue whether the artists were overly optimistic or the sailors just faked those smiles for the portraits. A rope coils near your boot, thick as your wrist. You nudge it gently with your toe. It's connected to a block and tackle system, a wooden pulley, smooth and warm to the touch. You lift the block slightly, feeling its weight. This simple contraption made it possible for small teams of men to hoist enormous sails or adjust rigging that weighed hundreds of pounds. The engineering here is so elegant you almost want to high-five the 18th century. You drift toward the foremast, looking up at the intricate layers of standing rigging, the ropes that stay fixed, and running rigging, the ropes that move. It's overwhelming, like staring at the internal wiring of a giant mechanical mind. But sailors navigated this chaos instinctively. They knew every line by feel, even in the dark, in storms, in moments when the deck tilted like a funhouse designed by a vengeful architect. You place a hand on the mast itself. The wood is smooth, the grain running vertically like long, quiet rivers. This mast held the sails that caught the wind, that powered the ship faster than you might expect, up to 11 or 12 knots on a good day. Doesn't sound like much until you realise this entire 3,500-ton oak monster was racing across the sea using nothing but wind and willpower. A quirky little tidbit pops into your mind. Sailors used to climb the rigging to relax, not as punishment, not as duty, for fun. They'd sit up on the tops, those platform-like perches halfway up the masts, just to get fresh air and escape the madness below. Imagine choosing to climb 100 feet into the sky for some me time. Meanwhile, you feel proud of yourself for climbing step stools at home. You keep walking aft, toward the mizzenmast, the smallest of the three. Its rigging is just as complex, and when you lean against one of the lines, it hums softly with the ship's movement. The vibrations travel up your arm, and for a moment it feels like you're listening to the ship's pulse through a stethoscope. This whole web of ropes and wood isn't static. It's alive with tension and release, constantly adjusting to the sea. You pass a sailor in your imagination, shimmying barefoot up the ratlines with a confidence that borders on reckless. He pauses, ties a knot so fast you can't even trace the motion, and grins at you like climbing 200 feet is just a casual pre-breakfast hobby. Sailors developed rope handling skills that modern experts still study today, especially the splices that look like magic tricks done with hemp. You walk farther toward the bow and the ship narrows beneath you. The bowsprit shoots forward like a wooden lance, its smaller sails fluttering lightly. You grip a rope near it and imagine stepping out onto that long slanted spar balancing above frothing waves. A strange thrill rises in your chest, equal parts fear and awe. Then you glance up again, always up. Because the masts and rigging tower above you like monuments to human stubbornness. They shouldn't work, they shouldn't hold, they shouldn't survive storms that snap trees like toothpicks. Yet they do. They did. They still do. And now the wind picks up slightly, tugging at the lines, stirring the rigging. The sound is gentle. Soft flutters, low hums, quiet knocks of wood against rope, almost musical. You exhale slowly, letting the rhythm settle into your bones. But the masts aren't the whole story. To make these giants work, someone has to command them. Someone has to read the wind, shout the orders, and know exactly how much canvas the ship can bear before she buckles. And that is the world you're about to step into next. You stand beneath the towering masts, the rigging murmuring above you like a restless choir, when a sudden sharp voice slices clean through the warm sea air. Not angry, just crisp, lean, and carrying the authority of someone who has spent far too many years yelling over wind, waves, and people who make questionable choices. You turn toward the quarterdeck, and there they are. The officers, the brains of this wooden beast, the humans whose job is to convince the ship to behave and the sailors to cooperate. Canvas and command, two forces that define every moment aboard HMS Victory, and right now you get front row seats. The officer calls out an order. It sounds like English, mostly. But each phrase is shaped by centuries of tradition, code, and a surprising fondness for overly specific directions. "Hands to set the main topsail," echoes across the deck, and immediately, men move. You don't even see the decision happen. They just go, like a flock of birds shifting formation mid-flight. You watch them sprint toward the lines, grabbing ropes thicker than some modern electrical cables. The deck thuds under their feet. The wind sighs overhead. A steady rhythm takes shape. Pull, brace, pull, heave, and the faint grunt of effort that tells you these men are built like human winches. You take a cautious step closer to one of the groups. They're hauling the halyard, raising the heavy yardarm inch by inch, and the wooden blocks squeal under the strain. The rope cuts deep grooves into the men's palms. Tar and sweat mix into a sort of unfortunate organic paste. You wipe your own hands on your trousers because you suddenly feel sticky in solidarity. A mainstream historical fact glides through your mind. The Royal Navy's success wasn't just about ships. It was about choreography. Orders had to be given loudly, clearly, and with absolute precision. A single wrong command in high wind could snap a mast, tear a sail, or fling a sailor into the ocean like a sad little skipping stone. Speaking of orders, one officer strides past you, coattails snapping, tricorn hat tilted at just the right level of "I'm in charge" and also mildly fabulous. You nod respectfully. He doesn't see you. Officers lived in a parallel universe where they floated above the chaos, steering it with words. You hear him shout another command, "Ease off the larboard braces," and even though you don't know exactly what that means, your brain pretends you do. Something about adjusting the angle of the sails relative to the wind. Sailors leap into action immediately, lines loosen, canvas shifts. The ship exhales and tilts slightly to one side as the wind fills the newly angled sail. You glance upward. The sail expands like a chest taking its first deep breath of the day. The sound of canvas catching wind is oddly soothing, a soft, satisfying whoomp, just enough to make you forget for a moment that this exact noise preceded thousands of terrifying naval battles. The rigging above becomes a flurry of motion. Men climb the ratlines, nimble as squirrels on an energy drink. They reach the tops, step onto impossibly narrow foot ropes, and begin unfurling the sailcloth. The canvas tumbles downward in great folds, catching the lantern light and the early dusk like silk being released during a magic trick. And here's your quirky tidbit. Sailors often name the sails. Yes, just like the cannons. A ship with over 24 sails meant each crew could decide whether to call theirs Old Flapper, the Widow's Apron, or, if they were feeling cheeky, the Admirable Admiral's Admirable Sail. Naval humour has always been a unique species. As they unfurl the canvas, you notice the men lean far, far over the yardarm to shake loose the folds. Your heart jumps into your throat, your hands sweating in protest. But to them, this is Tuesday. The ship rolls, and one sailor swings outward just enough to make you envision writing a very dramatic letter to his family. But he just laughs, tugs the line, and keeps working. Show off. Below, officers pace the deck, watching, judging, occasionally scribbling notes that definitely sound like Midshipman Hawkins still cannot tie a bowline to save his life. Future doomed. You shift closer to the mainmast. where a boatswain, the bosun as sailors say, stands with a whistle in his mouth. A shrill blast rings out, thin and sharp enough to slice through every other sound. The men respond instantly, because the bosun's call isn't just tradition, it's law. You feel the vibration of command ripple across the deck like static. The bosun gives you a quick glance, the kind that silently says, "Don't touch anything unless you want to be part of the ship permanently." You nod seriously. Another order rings out. This one sounds more urgent. Trim the foretopsail, and suddenly the men sprint again. The ship adjusts as ropes run through blocks with a deep wooden groan. Canvas flaps loudly, then settles taut. The entire vessel jerks slightly forward, as if waking up. Historians still argue whether officers were beloved, despised, or simply tolerated as long as the rum ration was decent. Truth is, it depended. Some were brilliant, some were strictly decorative, some were so young they hadn't figured out their angry voice yet. But all carried the weight of knowing one bad call could kill men or sink the ship. You feel that weight now, not crushing, but present. You walk aft toward the wheel, enormous and beautiful with its double handles. Two sailors stand on either side, gripping the spokes, muscles tight, eyes forward. They look like they could hold steady through a hurricane, and sometimes they did. The wheel isn't loose, it's connected by ropes and pulleys to the rudder far below. Every adjustment requires force, determination, timing. An officer stands nearby, calling gentle corrections as he watches the sail's angle. Commands aren't always barked. Sometimes they're murmured, precise as a surgeon's instructions. 2 points to starboard. Steady. Hold her there. You run a hand along the wheel. The wood feels smooth, worn by thousands of hands. You imagine Nelson himself touching this exact spot. The thought nudges your chest with a small, unexpected shiver. A final breeze rolls through the rigging, rippling canvas in a deep, harmonious flutter. You close your eyes and let it wash over you. The sound, the movement, the rhythm of a ship adjusting gracefully to the wind. This is command in motion, canvas and willpower merging, human judgment shaping raw elements into speed. And as victory shifts under your feet, you feel the ship begin to gather energy, alive, eager, humming. Because next comes the part more challenging than any order, the reality of living aboard her day after day. You feel the ship settle into a steady rhythm now, canvas humming above like great wooden lungs exhaling, ropes gently tightening and loosening with the ship's motion. It's the kind of movement that could rock you to sleep, or knock you flat on your face, depending entirely on how well you've adapted to life at sea. And right now, you're about to learn exactly what that life feels like. Because living aboard HMS Victory isn't glamorous. It isn't heroic. It isn't even comfortable. It's a long, loud, sweaty negotiation with boredom, duty, weather, and approximately 800 other humans who all snore. Your day begins before sunrise. Not that you know it's sunrise. The lower decks don't get natural light. Instead, someone shakes you awake in your hammock, and you spend a moment untangling your limbs like a confused marionette. You roll out, drop to the deck, and immediately regret being alive. The planks are cold, and your joints feel about 200 years older than you actually are. You grab your clothes, which are exactly the same clothes you wore yesterday, because laundry is a mythical concept here, and you join the others heading toward the main deck. The smell hits you first. Salty air, wet wood, stale sweat, and that lingering tang of tar that seems permanently embedded in the ship's soul. You inhale deeply, because congratulations, you now officially smell like a sailor. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind as you shuffle into morning routine. Sailors had to keep the deck spotless, not for aesthetics, though it does look nice when the planks shine, but because cleanliness prevented rot, disease, and oops, the deck just collapsed structural failures. So before breakfast, you help scrub the deck. Sand is scattered across the planks, and you kneel with a rough brush, scrubbing in circles like the world's saddest spa employee. Water sloshes, foam builds, the deck gleams. A sailor next to you mutters that scrubbing is his favourite part of the day. You glance at him, sceptical. Then he winks. Turns out sailors often joke their way through misery. Humour was a survival tool, that and rum, but mostly humour. Breakfast arrives in the form of steaming porridge, thicker than glue, but surprisingly edible if you don't ask too many questions about the lumps. Hardtack biscuits accompany the meal. You pick one up, tap it against the table, and listen as it produces a sound suspiciously similar to knocking on a brick wall. Hardtack is famous for being so hard that sailors sometimes carved initials into it. You try a bite and swear your molars file a complaint. You wander toward the waist of the ship as men move into their duties. Some climb rigging, some haul lines, others clean, repair, splice rope, patch sails, or stare at the sea with the hollow gaze of a man reconsidering every decision that led him here. You pass the carpenter's mate fixing a plank. The sound of hammering echoes through the hull, steady and rhythmic. Historians still argue whether sailors had more free time than modern people imagine, or whether their days were a relentless grind with only seconds of rest between tasks. The truth lies somewhere in the middle. Sailors had idle moments, but they were rarely allowed to be truly idle. Someone always needed rope work done. Someone always needed fishing lines repaired. Someone always needed to complain about something, and that took time too. Around midday, the sun climbs high, and the deck becomes bright enough to make you squint. The ship rolls gently beneath your boots, and you begin to notice a peculiar thing. The more the ship moves, the more your body accepts it. You sway unconsciously with the deck. You adjust your weight when she leans, you no longer stumble every 10 steps. Congratulations, you're becoming a sea creature. Just don't celebrate too soon, because here comes your quirky tidbit for the day. Sailors often suffered from sea legs confusion after long voyages. When they returned to land, they'd walk as if the ground beneath them still rolled. Some reportedly toppled over because the absence of motion felt wrong. Imagine tripping on flat pavement because it's too still. As the afternoon drags on, the ship gets hotter. Below deck, air thickens into a warm stew of smells that defy polite description. You push through it anyway, descending to the gun deck where men rest, chat, gamble with dice carved from bones or clean weapons. Someone's weaving rope. Someone else is sharpening a knife. A third is loudly insisting he once saw a mermaid, which sparks a debate that sailors have been arguing about for centuries. Were mermaids just manatees, or were sailors really that lonely? Historians still argue whether these sightings were deliberate exaggerations or legitimate misreadings of sea creatures. You decide not to weigh in. Later, you help turn the capstan, a massive vertical winch used to raise the anchor. Men push wooden bars around in a slow circle, grunting with the effort. The deck trembles slightly as the anchor chain rises from the depths. Sweat rolls down your back. Your arms ache. The soldier beside you grins and says, "First time, eh?" By evening, dinner arrives. Salted pork, questionable, dried peas, very questionable, and more biscuits. Let's not talk about those again. You take a sip of the daily ration, grog, a mix of rum and water. It tastes surprisingly decent, though you primarily enjoy how it softens the edges of the day. A sailor once joked that grog was like the ship's emotional support beverage. He wasn't wrong. When darkness falls, lanterns cast soft gold onto the deck. The sea glimmers like molten glass, and the ship creaks gently, as if settling into its nighttime posture. Men drift to their hammocks, swinging in rows like strange sea fruits hung to dry. You climb into your hammock with the grace of a tired dolphin. It sways immediately. The ship rocks. A man snores. Someone coughs. Someone mutters in his sleep. You close your eyes and let the movement carry you. It's almost peaceful, in a crowded, humid, slightly stinky sort of way. And just as you drift into sleep, a cold realization slips into your mind. Tomorrow might not be peaceful at all, because storms come fast at sea, and this ship, she has weathered more than most. The morning feels wrong before you even open your eyes. The hammock sways more sharply, jerking your stomach awake. The air is cooler, heavier, as if the ship herself is bracing her shoulders. You blink into the dim lantern glow and immediately hear it, that hollow, throaty moan of wind threading through the rigging above. It sounds like the ship is being played like a monstrous wooden flute by something impatient and very, very loud. You swing out of your hammock with all the grace of a startled crab and land on the deck. Men are already moving, quickly, urgently. No one shouts yet, but the silence is worse. A storm is coming. A big one. You climb to the main deck, and the moment your head rises through the hatch, a blast of cold wind slaps you across the face. Rain spits sideways, sharp and stinging. The sky is a bruise, deep grey, smeared with darker streaks that spiral like something alive. Out over the water, The horizon vanishes into a churning wall of cloud. You grip the hatchway, letting your eyes widen because, wow, nature isn't subtle today. A mainstream historical fact crosses your mind. Storms were the single greatest natural threat to wooden warships. Not enemy cannons, not disease. Storms. Even the strongest hull could splinter if hit wrong. Even the best trained crew could be swept overboard in seconds. Sailors didn't fear death. They feared the sea deciding to collect unpaid debts. You stagger forward as the deck tilts sharply beneath you. The wind roars through the rigging, tugging at ropes, slapping sails, shrieking against wooden spars. Officers shout orders now, loud, clipped, urgent. Reef the sails. Hands aloft. Secure the guns. And then the classic, hold fast. You could tattoo that onto your soul, and it still wouldn't be enough in a storm like this. You brace yourself against the mainmast as men scurry up the rigging, clinging to ratlines like frantic spiders. You watch one sailor climb with such speed you'd think the mast owes him money. Rain lashes him sideways, wind tries to fling him off, and he still manages to laugh. An insane, exhilarated laugh that gets stolen by the wind before it ever reaches your ears. You tilt your head toward the sky. The sails snap violently, their canvas booming like giant drums. The crew fights to reef them, pulling them in, tying them down so the wind won't tear the ship apart. The sound is overwhelming. The ship groans, blocks clatter, lines whip like angry serpents. The entire vessel shakes as if wrestling the storm itself. A quirky little tidbit squeezes into your brain. Sailors once believed whistling on deck could summon storms. That's why you will not whistle. You don't even think about whistling. In fact, you glare suspiciously at anyone who looks like they might be capable of whistling under pressure. The first wave hits. It slams into the bow, sending a spray so wide it feels like the ocean grabbed a bucket and threw it at you on purpose. Water rushes under your boots, cold and wild. You stagger, arms flailing, grabbing a rope just in time. Your heart leaps into your throat. Someone shouts, "Heads down," and you duck as another wave crashes over the bulwark. You wipe your face with a sleeve. Pointless, because another curtain of rain immediately drenches you. The ship tilts sharply to starboard, and you sway with it, knees bending instinctively. The deck isn't stable. It's a moving puzzle that changes shape every few seconds. You plant your feet wide, gripping a line with one hand. Then the thunder rolls in. Not gentle, not rumbling, violent, explosive. The sound crashes overhead like cannons firing from the sky. Lightning flickers across the clouds, illuminating the rigging in stark white flashes. In those brief moments, the sailors look like silhouettes etched against a storm-painted backdrop. Tiny humans clinging to an enormous machine. You try to step forward, but the ship heaves beneath you like a beast trying to buck you off. You slam into a bulkhead, grunt, then immediately pretend that didn't happen. A nearby sailor gives you a sympathetic look that somehow makes it worse. The officers shout again, voices breaking through the storm. "Strike the topgallant sails! Secure the yard arms! Watch your footing!" You cling to the mast and inch your way toward the weather deck, each movement a negotiation with gravity. The ship rolls, pitching forward so steeply you swear you see the bow dipping toward oblivion. Water pours across the planks, barrels bang against their ropes, doors rattle violently. Historians still argue whether storms forge stronger crews or simply traumatize them into lifelong superstition. Honestly, having stood here for 6 minutes, you're leaning toward traumatized. This is not the kind of weather where anyone thinks philosophical thoughts. A sailor beside you screams a joke into the wind. "If we survive this, drinks are on you." You shout back, "If we survive this, I'm never touching water again." He laughs, even as the rain pelts his face like thrown gravel. Another wave pounds the hull and the ship shivers violently. You hear a deep cracking sound, wood bending under pressure, and you freeze. But it doesn't break. The hull holds, the ribs hold, the ship groans but stays strong. You don't realize you're holding your breath until you gasp for air. The storm howls louder. Wind tears at your clothes. The crew moves like a single organism, each man in sync with the others. They haul ropes, secure lines, lash down loose gear. Nothing is calm, nothing is safe, but everything is brilliantly, desperately coordinated. You cling to a rail, squinting through the rain, and think, this is madness. But also, this is power. The ship isn't just enduring the storm, she's challenging it. But storms don't last forever. They break, they pass. They remind you how fragile, how stubborn, how small you are. And soon enough, the crew will face something equally dangerous. Something that doesn't roar but whispers. Because after the storm clears and the sky regains its breath, distant sails appear on the horizon. The storm doesn't end so much as dissolve, slowly, reluctantly, like a giant realizing it has somewhere else to be. The rain thins into mist. The wind softens its growl into a tired sigh, and the ship, battered and dripping, rises from each swell with something like pride. You exhale for what feels like the first time in hours, your fingers unclenching from the rope they've been gripping in a death hug. The sky opens into a wide, pale blue streaked with silver clouds. Sunlight glints off the wet deck, turning puddles into shimmering mirrors. The men move wearily, hauling lines, untying reef knots, shaking out soaked clothes. Some cough seawater out of their lungs. Others just sit down where they are, grateful to still exist. You look around and let your heartbeat settle back into the rhythm of a ship that survived another tantrum from nature. And yet, something in the air feels different. Tense, focused, like the ship has pivoted from endurance to expectation. Then you hear it, soft at first, barely more than a breath. Sail ho! You freeze. Your head snaps toward the lookout perched high in the foremast's top. He points, a small rigid silhouette against the brightening sky. Sail ho! Off the larboard bow. The words ripple across the deck instantly. Men straighten. Officers turn sharply. You feel the ship's mood shift from exhausted relief into coiled awareness. You strain your eyes toward the horizon. At first, all you see is haze, light glancing off the waves, shadows drifting like daydreams. And then, yes, a faint pale triangle. A sliver of canvas far, far away. You narrow your eyes. Another shape appears behind it. And another. Not one ship, several. Your stomach drops with that slow-motion oh-no feeling usually reserved for realizing you left the oven on or agreed to babysit an entire classroom of 6-year-olds. The ocean ahead of you is filling with shapes. White sails rising, shimmering, multiplying. The officers gather on the quarterdeck speaking in low, urgent tones. You can't hear them, but you catch fragments. Could be French. Keeping formation. Too many to ignore. A mainstream historical fact nudges your shoulder. In the age of sail, sighting distant sails was like seeing the future. Your very own choose-your-own-adventure. Except the options were usually either fight or run, or occasionally panic gracefully. And the Royal Navy almost never chose run. You swallow. Hard. The ship's role feels different now. Not relaxing, but anticipatory. The wind combs through the rigging with little sharp whistles like the ship whispering ready or not. Men move quickly across the deck, stowing leftover storm gear, checking weapons, tightening, ropes. No one says it out loud yet, but they all know. The other ships are closing the distance. You've entered that strange electric waiting period before combat. The quiet judgment zone where everyone pretends they aren't terrified. A sailor beside you squints at the horizon and mutters, "Could just be merchants." Another replies, "Yep, and I'm the King of Spain." They both laugh too loudly. Fear does that. You lean against the rail, eyes locked on the distant sails. They tilt in perfect unison with the swell, a ghostly fleet rising and falling like a chorus line. You're far enough away that the hulls look like dark smudges, close enough that your imagination fills in cannons, flags and men, preparing just as nervously as you are. Historians still argue whether lookouts exaggerated sightings to impress officers, sail ho, being an excellent shortcut to momentary glory. But judging by the tension tightening the crew around you, this is no exaggeration. Those ships are real, and getting closer. You shift your weight as the Victory changes course slightly, angling her bow toward the horizon. The deck tilts and rights itself. Men adjust their footing automatically. The wheel creaks as the helmsmen guide her with controlled strength. The ship isn't just moving, she's aligning, choosing her stance. Beside the helmsman, an officer lifts a speaking trumpet and bellows toward the deck. "All hands! Beat to quarters!" It's a phrase sharp enough to cut through bone. A heartbeat later, the drum begins. A single snare, steady and urgent, beating a pattern that sends men racing into position. The sound vibrates through the deck planks, up your legs, into your chest. You feel it more than hear it. Your pulse automatically syncs with it. The drum is awakening the ship, calling her to war. Men scramble below deck to the gun deck, weapons crews preparing their stations. Powder boys hurry to their posts. Marines fall into formation against the bulwarks, loading muskets and checking flints. The boatswain strides across the deck, whistling orders that pierce the building noise with needle-like precision. The sails billow as the ship gains speed. The wind catches them eagerly, as if sharing the crew's determination. The Victory surges through the water, cutting clean waves that sparkle despite the tension hanging over the deck. A quirky little tidbit floats into your mind. Sailors sometimes guessed an enemy's mood by the way their sails looked. Full and firm, aggressive, loose and rippling, hesitant. You squint. The distant sails look purposeful. They're not running. They're not drifting. They're coming. Closer now. You can make out more details. A darker line along the hull, gun ports maybe, a faint flutter atop the highest mast. A flag. Too distant to identify. Your shoulders tense despite yourself. The officers lift telescopes, passing them back and forth. One sucks in a breath. Another murmurs something too low to catch. A third simply nods. Uh-oh. You don't hear the official announcement, but the message spreads across the deck in murmured waves. Enemy ships. A quiet settles that's somehow louder than the storm was. Men exchange looks. Some grin with reckless excitement. Some swallow hard. Some whisper quick prayers. You? You grip the rail tightly and remind yourself to breathe. The enemy ships grow larger on the horizon, their sails sharp and white against the deepening sky. They're coming fast. An HMS Victory, still glistening from the storm, begins to ready herself. Because the next moments won't be waiting. The drumbeat continues, steady, insistent, a heartbeat that belongs not to one man but to the entire ship. You feel it through the soles of your boots, through the planks, through your ribs. The air tightens around you, as if every molecule has suddenly been assigned a station. Preparing for war isn't a moment, it's a transformation. An HMS Victory is already changing shape beneath your feet. You move with the others toward the hatchway that leads below, the ship buzzing with purposeful motion. Men jog past you, some tightening jackets, some tying hair back, some muttering quiet jokes meant to mask the tremor in their voices. A sailor elbows his friend and says, "Last one alive buys the first round." They laugh harder than the joke deserves. Fear, again, wearing a cheerful mask. You descend into the gun deck and the change hits immediately. The space that earlier felt like a quiet wooden cathedral now feels like a powerhouse awakening. Cannons stand ready in their rows, their dark iron gleaming under lantern light. Gun crews gather around them, checking equipment, adjusting ropes, running cloths through barrels one more time. Anything to feel prepared. You approach a 32-pounder, the same one you touched earlier. Now it looks different. Hungrier. The gun captain barks an order, and the crew springs into practiced movement. You watch as men arrange powder cartridges, cannonballs, wads of flannel, iron rammers, worm tools, buckets of water, each piece of equipment placed with the precision of ritual. Mainstream historical fact. During major battles, each gun fired once every 2 minutes, sometimes faster. That might not sound impressive until you realize each shot involved 12 men performing about 26 synchronized steps, any one of which could maim or kill if done incorrectly. And all of that while the ship rolled, enemies fired back and smoke thickened into choking fog. You step aside as a powder boy darts past you, barefoot, quick, no older than 12. He disappears into the shadows near the magazine hatch. Powder boys earned their name for carrying the explosive charges from the ship's protected magazine to the guns. They moved quickly, soles slapping softly on the deck, like nervous little ghosts with very important jobs. A quirky bit of naval folklore drifts across your mind. Sailors believed powder boys had fireproof luck. Not scientifically true, obviously. Sparks and children are a notoriously bad combination. But sailors insisted the boys moved like the ship protected them. Superstition was a coping mechanism. You cling to the idea anyway. You move along the gun deck as men check gun locks, passing flint mechanisms between calloused fingers. Marines line up at the far bulkhead, cleaning muskets, bayonets clinking softly as steel touches steel. A sergeant inspects them with the expression of someone who has no patience for lowered standards, especially today. The smell begins to change. Less tar, more anxiety. Your stomach flips in anticipation. Overhead, feet stomp across the deck as sailors adjust the sails. Orders drift down through the hatchway. Close the gun ports until we're in range. Hands to braces. Steady! Keep her to windward. You climb back to the main deck, blinking into the harshness of daylight. The enemy ships are bigger now, distinct silhouettes carving themselves out of the horizon. You can see hulls, masts, gunport lines, flags fluttering you still can't quite identify, but the tension in the officer's posture tells you everything. The ship feels alive, and she is. Warships weren't just platforms, they were living ecosystems of wood, rope, iron, fire, sweat, and noise. They inhaled wind and exhaled destruction. A shrill whistle blasts across the deck, the boatswain. Men rush to their positions. You try not to get in the way, which is harder than it sounds because suddenly the entire deck feels like a human ant colony, except the ants are large, sweaty, and determined. You slide against the starboard rail as carpenters bring up long, rolled bundles, collision mats, thick canvas sheets meant to be stuffed against holes in the hull during battle. Imagine preparing for combat by pre-gathering your giant hole plugs. Comforting, isn't it? Farther aft, you watch the signal midshipmen hoist flags in rapid succession. Naval flags communicate orders across long distances, and right now those bright squares of colour flutter commands toward the rest of the fleet. You recognise none of them, but the men do. Their eyes flick upward periodically, checking the message like students glancing at a chalkboard. Historians still argue whether signalling during battles was truly efficient, or if half of it was guesswork and prayer. Given the wind, smoke, chaos, and occasional seagull with a sense of humour, you suspect prayer helped. Another command erupts from the quarterdeck. Sharpen boarding weapons. You glance toward a small group of sailors hauling crates onto the deck. Inside, cutlasses, pikes, boarding axes, all polished, all far too sharp for your comfort. One sailor holds a cutlass up to the light, inspecting its edge, and gives a satisfied grunt. He catches your eye and offers a grin that suggests he sleeps fine at night. You step away respectfully. More commands ripple across the deck. One officer strides by shouting for sand buckets. Sand? Yes. They sprinkle sand across the deck to absorb blood and prevent slipping. Welcome to the part of the ship's job description that HR would definitely object to. You shoulder your way toward the bow as men secure the last gear in place. Everything loose is tied down. Barrels lashed. Tools stored. Even the galley fires are extinguished to reduce risk of explosions. Nothing is left to chance. Well, nothing except the thousands of things absolutely left to chance during naval combat. You pause when you reach the bowsprit, gripping the angled timber as the ship surges. Forward. The waves slap against the hull, white spray bursting upward in rhythmic hisses. The forward motion feels hungry, determined, like the ship wants to close the distance, and she does. The enemy ships loom large now, sails taut, hulls dark, masts bristling. You hear men murmuring guesses. French, Spanish. No, look, the mizzen shape, Spanish for sure. Someone adds, well, whoever they are, they're rude for showing up today. A laugh ripples across the deck. Nervous, thin, but real. You grip the rail, your pulse thudding in your ears. The Victory adjusts course again, gracefully aligning her broadside toward the enemy. Cannons below are loaded, primed, ready. Men grip ropes with deliberate calm. Officers stand tall, eyes locked on the horizon. The wind fills the sails with a deep, resonant whump that feels like the ship inhaling one final breath before the storm of battle. Because the moment is close. Too close to ignore, too late to retreat. And the next heartbeat won't be preparation, it'll be war. The last few moments before battle feel impossibly slow, thick, stretched, humming with tension so tight it could snap like an overstressed rope. You stand on the quarterdeck staring across the narrowing stretch of sea as the enemy ships bear down, their canvas full and gleaming, their hulls rising and falling with hungry grace. The air tastes metallic. The ship beneath your boots vibrates with anticipation, as if every bolt, every plank, every grain of oak knows exactly what's coming. Then a command slices the silence. Open the gun ports! The words roll down into the gun deck, and a thunderous series of bangs follows as men unlatch the heavy shutters. Sunlight floods into the lower deck in sharp horizontal stripes, illuminating rows of cannons now staring outward like iron predators. The ship changes in an instant. No longer a floating home, no longer a wooden fortress. Now she's a weapon. The distance closes. Fast. You steady yourself at the rail. Your breath catches as you see officers raising telescopes, shouting bearings, adjusting course by tiny degrees. The enemy line angles toward you, their own gun ports yawning open in a sinister smile. Somewhere deep in your chest, your heartbeat picks up its own drum cadence. A mainstream historical fact pops into your mind. Naval battles of the 18th century weren't chaotic melees, they were highly coordinated line-of-battle engagements. Ships formed neat rows, firing broadsides at point-blank range like two enormous floating firing squads. It sounds orderly on paper. In practice, it was thunder, fire, splinters, panic, and the constant threat of one wrong wave sending everything sideways. A bosun's whistle screams overhead. "Stand by your guns!" Below deck you hear the scuffling of boots, the shuffle of powder cartridges, the creak of iron dragged into position. The cannons are run out, massive wheels squealing slightly as they slide forward, until their muzzles jut through the ports. You swallow, hard. The enemy flag snaps in the wind, now clearly visible. Spanish. A massive ship leads the line, her hull dark and heavy, her masts towering with the arrogance of a vessel that believes she cannot be sunk. Historians still argue whether the opening shot of a battle mattered psychologically more than tactically. Some captains insisted on firing first for morale, others preferred holding until the enemy was so close you could count the buttons on their jackets. You suspect both approaches were equally terrifying. The officer beside you lowers his telescope. "Ready, Mr. Hardy," and then, slowly, deliberately, he turns toward the crew. "Fire as you bear!" The world explodes. A blast erupts from the lower deck, a deep gut-clenching boom that shakes the entire ship. Smoke bursts through the gun ports like volcanic breath. You feel the deck tremble beneath you, hear men shouting, hear the sharp clatter of recoil as the cannons slam backward on their ropes. Another boom, and another. The sound isn't just loud, it consumes everything. It shoves itself into your bones, your lungs, your eyes. You blink against the smoke curling upward through hatchways. It burns your throat, tastes like salt and sulphur. Then, impact. The enemy's broadside answers yours with brutal precision. Cannonballs tear through the air with a sound like a giant ripping cloth. The ship shudders violently. Wood splinters explode from the bulwark, sharp, deadly shards that fly like arrows. Men duck instinctively. You throw yourself against the rail, flinching as a splinter the size of a toothbrush whizzes past your ear. Someone swears. Someone else laughs because fear and comedy are still awkward roommates. Another cannon fires below deck, close to your feet this time. You hear the shouted rhythm of the crew. "Run out! Prime! Load! Ram home! Ready!" The gun deck becomes a furnace, filled with smoke, sweat, and frantic activity. Powder boys sprint through the haze. Gun crews shove their cannons forward again and again, hands blistering, eyes watering. The lanterns flicker wildly with each blast. You can almost see the scene through the deck in your imagination, a long, dim corridor of fire and motion. Reset, reload, run out, fire. Repeat until your arms give out or the ship stops shaking. Another massive boom tears through the hull as an enemy shot smashes into the side. The deck tilts sharply, pitching you sideways. You grab a rope, boots skidding across wet wood. The ship rights herself slowly, groaning like a wounded animal. A quirky tidbit sneaks into your mind even now. Sailors believed the ship herself protected them in battle. They swore they felt her fighting under their feet, leaning into the wind, bracing for impact, shuddering with each broadside like a living creature absorbing blows to shield her crew. Standing here now, you almost understand why. Another broadside thunders out from your port guns. You feel it up your legs like a giant heartbeat. An officer shouts, "Enemy falling astern! Maintain fire!" You brace yourself as Victory surges forward, passing dangerously close to the enemy ship. You glimpse her deck, chaotic, crowded with men scrambling to reload their own cannons. Smoke rolls across their faces, turning them into half-seen ghosts. A cannon atop their forecastle fires. The bull screams overhead, high, close, carving through rigging. A block falls near your feet with a violent thud. Lines snap. Sails flutter wildly like panicked birds. "Cut away that damage!" Men leap into action, hauling ropes, slicing tangled lines, shouting over the roar, and then another broadside. Point blank. Your cannons unleash at once, a synchronized explosion so powerful it knocks you slightly backward. Fire bursts from the gun ports in bright orange flares. Smoke follows like rolling fog. The enemy hull erupts in splinters. You hear screams, faint, carried on the wind. The ship beneath you feels alive with fury. Every boom feels like a heartbeat. You grip the rail tighter, lungs burning with smoke, eyes watering, and still the cannons fire, still the decks tremble, still the gunners shout orders through the din. Time ceases to behave normally. It stretches, contracts, breaks into fragments of sound and motion. A cannon recoils violently. A powder boy slips and recovers. An officer raises his sword. A sail tears with a sharp, ripping cry. The hull shakes violently as another shot strikes home, and over it all, the unending thunder of guns. You cling to the rail, heart hammering, and realize you've stepped into the roaring center of a world ruled by noise, smoke, and raw survival. Every man here fights with instinct, training, fear, courage, chaos, and the battle is far from over. Because once ships draw close enough, and if the sea wills it, another kind of nightmare begins. Boarding. When men leap from ship to ship, when the fight becomes personal, when war tightens into hand-to-hand survival, and the victory is almost in range. Smoke pours across the deck in dense, swirling waves, grey, acrid, clinging to your throat as if it wants to become a permanent resident. The cannons below thunder again, their recoil shaking the entire ship. You duck instinctively as a line snaps overhead with a sharp crack, whipping past your ear like an angry wasp. Men shout, officers bark orders. Somewhere behind you, a marine yells for more flints. Every sense you have feels overloaded, stretched thin, vibrating with the ship's fury. And then you hear it. A different kind of order, sharper, older. "Prepare to board!" The words slice through the chaos, through the smoke, through your spine. Boarding. You turn toward the enemy ship, now so close you can see individual men through the haze. Spanish sailors shouting, running, loading muskets, ducking behind their bulwarks. The gap between the two hulls narrows. With each swell, it's maybe 20 feet, maybe less. The water churns violently between you, dark green waves clawing upward like hungry hands. Boarding is the moment when naval combat stops being about cannons and becomes violently personal. The kind of fighting where the smell of gunpowder mixes with sweat and fear. The kind where splinters turn into daggers. The kind where you really begin to understand why people wrote dramatic poetry about the sea. Mostly because they didn't want to describe this part too literally. The Marines gather along the bulwark, muskets loaded and bayonets fixed. Their faces are pale but determined, lips tight, eyes focused, bodies poised like coiled springs. One Marine offers you a brittle half-smile. "If I don't make it back," he says, "tell my mother I did something awesome." You nod, though you plan on doing no such thing because you're absolutely planning on him surviving. A mainstream historical fact surfaces through the adrenaline. Officers often avoided leading boarding actions unless absolutely necessary. Why? Because once you were hand-to-hand, your fancy rank meant nothing except first target. Marines and sailors did the real fighting, muscle, grit, and a lot of very sharp metal. Speaking of sharp metal, sailors haul crates onto the deck and yank them open. Out spill cutlasses, short curved swords built for close quarters. Boarding axes, small metal hatchets with wicked points for hooking rigging, smashing planks, or, unpleasant things. Pistols, single shot, slow to reload, but deadly at arm's length. You pick up a cutlass, surprised by its weight. Heavier than you expect, but perfectly balanced. You swing it gently, and a sailor nearby grins. "Careful," he says, "the ship doesn't need extra holes." You immediately stop swinging. The Spanish ship fires another volley. Cannonballs hit the water between you with deep, monstrous splashes. Musket shots crack like snapping branches. A ball whizzes past your cheek. You feel the air shiver as it passes. Marines return fire, a crackling volley that sends puffs of white smoke blooming across the deck. Then, impact. The hull shudders violently as the ships collide side by side, timbers grinding, with a sound so deep you feel it in your teeth. The world lurches. You stumble, catching yourself on a rope. The enemy ship looms beside you now, close enough that you could toss a biscuit across and insult their bakery skills. Men throw grappling hooks. The hooks arc through the smoke, clattering onto the enemy's rail. Lines go taut. The ships lock together in a violent embrace. Boarding has begun. The first Marines fire another volley, dropping enemy sailors who crowd their bulwarks. Then, with a shout that's half battle cry and half "I can't believe I'm doing this," they leap across the gap, some landing on the enemy deck, others catching ropes, others slipping and dangling before scrambling up again, like furious, determined cats. You climb onto the bulwark, gripping a rope so tightly your knuckles turn whiter than sea foam. The gap between ships heaves beneath you. Someone shouts, "Now!" You step, push, and jump, not gracefully, not heroically, but with the terrified commitment of someone who doesn't want to fall into the ocean and become a snack. Your boots hit the enemy deck hard. You nearly collapse but manage to stay upright. Chaos swallows you instantly. Shouts in 2 languages, smoke thicker than breath, the clatter of steel hitting steel. Behind you, more of Victory's crew leap aboard, sailors swinging axes, Marines advancing with bayonets outstretched, officers shouting formations that immediately dissolve into improvisation. Boarding was never neat. It was desperation painted with adrenaline. You duck as a Spanish sailor swings at you with a cutlass. The blade whistles past your face, way too close. You stumble backward, bringing your own weapon up awkwardly. Before you can do something heroic, a Marine barrels past you, tackles the man, and shouts, "Keep moving!" You do exactly that. Historians still argue whether boarding actions were brave or reckless, or both. They were often unpredictable, decided in seconds, and brutal enough that even seasoned sailors admitted they'd rather face a dozen broadsides than one angry man with a boarding axe. You push forward, stepping over fallen weapons, grasping the rail as the ship rocks violently from the recoil of continued cannon fire. Even while men fight on deck, the cannons below still thunder, their blasts shaking both ships together like 2 beasts locked in combat. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Some sailors believe that touching the ship's figurehead before boarding brought good luck. You didn't do that. You mentally apologize to the figurehead. Around you, men shout positions, calling for reinforcements as they push the enemy crew back. Bayonets flash, cutlasses clash, pistols bark their single thunderous shots. Smoke curls around your ankles and stings your eyes. You duck beneath a swinging spar as rigging collapses between the ships, showering you with rope fibers. Somewhere nearby, someone is laughing, loud, wild, terrifying. Someone else is praying loudly enough that you can hear words even over the noise. A Marine grips your shoulder and pulls you behind a mast. "Stay close," he says. "Ships don't fight clean." You nod, breath rasping, heart pounding. The Spanish crew is falling back now, retreating toward their quarterdeck. Victory's men push forward, relentless, fueled by momentum and fear and sheer stubbornness. You watch as the boarding party gains ground, inch by smoky inch, until finally, enemy resistance buckles. The air shifts, the shouting quiets, the clang of steel fades. The ship beneath you still creaks, still groans, but the fury is easing. A signal officer waves his arm, shouting to Victory to cease fire. The battle's worst moments are over, but the aftermath is its own world. Quiet, heavy, surreal. Because after the fury of boarding, there's a strange, aching pause as the ship tries to remember how to breathe again. And so do you. The noise doesn't stop so much as unravel. One moment the world is a knot of shouts, steel, smoke, and chaotic motion, and the next, it's as if someone has taken scissors to the tension. Everything loosens, everything sags. Your ears ring with leftover thunder, though the guns have gone silent. The smoke drifts in lazy curls now, no longer whipped by frantic bodies or bursting artillery. It settles over the deck like a heavy grey blanket, hiding details you're not sure you want to see. You stand very still, not because someone told you to, but because your legs don't entirely trust themselves yet. The enemy deck feels foreign under your boots, like a floor that wasn't meant for you. Around you, Men slump against rails, leaning on their weapons, chests heaving. A marine nearby coughs hard enough that it echoes through his whole body. Another laughs softly, a tired, shaky laugh that isn't about humour at all, just shock leaking out. The air smells of burned powder, splintered wood, sweat, and something coppery you try not to interpret too literally. You wipe your face with your sleeve and find a streak of soot there, dark as charcoal. You look up at the sky. It's strangely calm again, pale blue peeking through drifting smoke, as if nature has already moved on. The sea rolls gently. The battle is over, but the ship still sways in a rhythm that doesn't care about human problems. A mainstream historical fact floats through your mind like a life raft. After every naval battle, crews transitioned immediately into repair mode. No matter how shaken, how exhausted, how bruised, the next priority was simple: keep the ship afloat. Victory or not, a damaged ship was still one strong swell away from disaster. You hear the call ring out from Victory's deck across the narrow gap. Boarders return! Repair parties to stations! Men begin moving again, not with the frantic energy of combat, but with the groaning reluctance of people who absolutely deserve a break and are absolutely not getting one. You step over a broken spar, climb back onto the bulwark, and carefully cross the few feet of rope and timber bridge that connects the two ships. When your feet land on Victory's deck again, you feel an unexpected warmth in your chest, like stepping into your own home after a long, terrifying night. The ship is battered. You see it immediately. Lines hang loose where they should be taut. A chunk of rail is missing. Splintered wood lies everywhere, some pieces tiny as needles, some long and jagged. A sailor crouches with a bucket, brushing the deck as if sweeping away the battle itself. Another stands by the mast, pressing a cloth to a cut on his forehead while muttering about barely a scratch. Carpenters are already at work, hauling thick wooden plugs, hammers and tarred canvas. They move toward the lower decks with purposeful strides. You follow, descending into dimness again. Down here the damage is sharper. A cannon is jammed, crooked in its rope, the recoil having cracked one of the deck beams. A carpenter taps it with his mallet, listening to the wood's complaint like a doctor checking a patient's lungs. You hear men clearing debris, pushing splintered boards aside, patching holes with collision mats, huge thick sheets shoved against fresh breaches. One man slaps tar over a seam with the enthusiasm of someone icing a cake at 3 a.m. He notices your stare and says, "It won't be pretty, but it'll keep the water out." You nod approvingly, though you know absolutely nothing about maritime repair. Historians still argue whether battle damage was more dangerous during the fight or after. Many ships survived cannon fire only to sink hours later when slow leaks overwhelmed them. Water was the quiet enemy, patient, steady, relentless. You look at the carpenters now, understanding exactly why their work mattered as much as the gunners. Nearby the mood shifts to something gentler but no less urgent. The wounded are being carried to the surgeon. You swallow hard as you follow the movement toward the orlop deck, the ship's medical space. The air grows heavy, thick with the smell of sweat and cloth. Men lie on blankets, some groaning softly, others silent and pale. The surgeon moves quickly from one to the next, his apron stained, his hands decisive. It's not gore, it's necessity, efficiency, survival. But even here, humour stubbornly flickers. One wounded sailor lifts his head and declares, "Tell the Admiral I'd like extra rum for bravery." The surgeon snorts. "You'll get rum when you can stand without falling over." The sailor replies, "So, never?" And someone nearby chuckles through their pain. Your quirky tidbit for this moment. Some sailors believed that battle splinters, those vicious, needle-like shards of oak, were more dangerous than cannonballs. A cannonball might smash through a wall, but splinters, they flew unpredictably and could turn a man's arm or leg into something the surgeon eyed with his bone saw. Splinters were the sea's shrapnel, feared with a superstitious intensity that even seasoned veterans admitted reluctantly. You step away, giving the medical team space, and make your way back toward the gun deck where repairs continue. There's a strange, almost sacred hush now, like the whole ship is exhaling. Even the cannons seem subdued, their muzzles still warm, their barrels blackened from firing. Men wipe them down gently, like calming horses after a long wild gallop. You notice one sailor sitting with his back to a pillar, staring at his hands, shaking visibly. Another kneels beside him, offering a canteen. They exchange no words, but their foreheads rest briefly together. In that moment, you see the truth beneath all the yelling, the bravado, the rituals. Survival makes family out of strangers. Above deck, the breeze clears more smoke away. Officers walk the deck, cataloguing damage, murmuring quietly among themselves. The helmsmen look exhausted but proud. The sails flap lazily now, tattered in places. A topmast leans slightly, its rigging strained. The boatswain barks orders to reinforce it before the wind picks up again. You lean against the rail and finally breathe deeply. The sea spreads calm and glittering around you, as if she hasn't noticed the chaos she just hosted. The enemy ship drifts beside Victory, taken, silent, subdued. It's done, for now. But in the quiet after battle, something else rises. Not fear, not adrenaline, something gentler. Reflection, gratitude, the understanding that this wooden world held together when it mattered most. And as repairs continue, you feel the ship's confidence restoring itself, plank by plank, rope by rope, breath by breath, because soon she'll move again, soon the winds will change, and soon you'll step into another part of her mind, the place where direction becomes destiny. The navigators are waiting. You climb slowly back toward the upper deck, leaving behind the hammering carpenters, the murmuring wounded, and the last fading curls of battle smoke drifting like ghosts through the lower decks. As you emerge into fresh air, the sea breeze feels almost shockingly clean, cool against your skin, sharp enough to cut through the residue of gunpowder still clinging to your throat. The world looks strangely peaceful again, sunlight glittering on calm waves, gulls circling as if nothing extraordinary just happened. The enemy prize ship floats quietly nearby, subdued and skeletal with torn sails. But up here on Victory's quarterdeck, a different kind of work is beginning. The mental work, the directional work, the decisions that turn chaos into strategy. You step closer to the raised deck where the officers stand. This space has a different energy than anywhere else on the ship. It's quieter, not because people don't talk, but because every word here is meant to shape the ship's future. The quarterdeck is the brain of the beast, where the ship's purpose becomes action. A long table has been unfolded and on it lie charts, large inked maps of the sea, coasts, shoals, and invisible things like prevailing winds and favoured enemy routes. A compass rests at one corner, brass gleaming. Dividers lie open, their pointed legs ready to calculate distances. A sextant sits nearby, angular and beautiful, like a mathematical sculpture that happens to tell you where you are in the universe. You step closer, peering at the chart as the navigator brushes a hand over the parchment, smoothing its edges. He mutters numbers quietly to himself, latitudes, wind directions, estimates of drift caused by the storm. His voice is measured, calm. A man who looks at an ocean the way accountants look at spreadsheets. A mainstream historical fact settles into place. Navigation in the 18th century was a meticulous blend of science, art, and hope. Sailors used dead reckoning, celestial observations, and tide charts. But even with skill, they were often miles off course. The sea didn't care about precision. The sea liked to play. The navigator points to a mark on the chart. "We were pushed farther west during the storm than we realized," he says to the first lieutenant. "But with clear skies tonight, we can get a proper fix." You lean over slightly, trying to understand. The chart looks like an elegant puzzle. Lines curling around coastlines, symbols marking reefs or ports. You notice tiny notations scribbled in the margins. One reads, "Beware unexpected shoals, debated by sailors." That's reassuring. Historians still argue whether these so-called phantom shoals ever existed, or if they were sailor stories blamed on inaccurate earlier maps. Either way, you hope not to test them tonight. Several sailors unfurl the long log-line reel near the taffrail. It's a rope with knots tied at regular intervals, attached to a wooden log tossed into the sea. As the ship moves, they measure how many knots run out in a set time, thus knots as a unit of speed. A quirky tidbit. Sometimes marine life would grab the log and drag it unexpectedly, giving the ship an embarrassingly inaccurate speed reading. Imagine writing in the logbook, "Speed, 18 knots, possibly exaggerated by curious dolphin." The officer of the watch calls out as the helmsman adjusts the wheel. "Steady, Steady! Bring her 1 point to starboard. The 2 sailors on the wheel move their arms slowly, muscles taut. You watch the spokes turn, the ropes along the deck tightening, messages carried silently to the rudder deep below. Steering isn't brute force. It's constant negotiation with an immense wooden creature that wants to follow its own habits. A gust of wind flutters the edge of the chart, and you gently press it flat. The navigator glances up briefly, giving you a nod of thanks, then goes right back to calculating. His tools move gracefully, dividers stepping across the map, parallel rulers sliding like dancers across inked coastlines, pencil making tight little notes about wind direction. You watch as he lifts his sextant, its brass frame catching the sunlight, and points it toward the sky. Tonight he'll wait for stars, but now he practices, adjusting the arc, aligning the mirrors, measuring the angle of the sun. The motion looks meditative, almost ceremonial. Navigation was as spiritual as it was mathematical. He lowers the sextant and turns the page of his logbook. "If we make good time," he murmurs, "we can rejoin the fleet by dawn." His voice is steady, but you hear the weight underneath. A fleet scattered after a storm is vulnerable. Direction matters. You pace slowly along the deck, feeling the swell beneath your feet. Every rise and fall feels connected to the work happening behind you, the unseen geometry that keeps the ship oriented in a world without roads. The ocean stretches endlessly, every direction, looking identical if you aren't trained to read its moods. Historians still argue whether navigators were the unsung heroes of naval warfare, or simply the least talked about stress cases aboard. After all, one wrong number could run the ship aground, sail her straight into enemy waters, or leave her drifting lost with 800 very hungry, very grumpy men. You decide navigators deserve medals, naps, and probably their own dessert ration. You move to the taffrail, watching the line of wake stretching behind the Victory, white foam trails like a ribbon marking her path. But here's the secret. Even that ribbon lies. Currents twist it, winds warp it, waves distort it. Navigation is constantly adjusting, reacting, updating. A sailor comes up from below with a speaking tube. He reads a message from the carpenter. Hull repairs holding, pumps running. Good news, mostly. The ship creaks as if acknowledging its own stubborn resilience. You glance at the sails above. Some are patched already with quick-stitched canvas squares. Others flap unevenly where rigging was damaged. A team of top men climb the shrouds again, because battle repairs never really end, and disappear into the forest of rope. "Wind's shifting," someone calls. The navigator folds his chart with quick, sure hands and signals the officers. Orders follow immediately, slicing the air. "Brace the main yard. Hands to the mizzen sheets. Adjust the foretopsail," and the ship responds. Lines snap tight. Blocks groan. Sails shift shape like living things catching their breath. The Victory turns slightly, angling toward her new heading. You feel it. Not just physically, but emotionally. The moment a ship finds her course again, after storms, after battle, after chaos, direction is a kind of healing. The navigator closes his log, satisfied for now. The officers share a rare small smile. The tension doesn't vanish, but it softens. You stand at the rail, watching the horizon stretch ahead. Calm for now, wide open, but the ship has many more stories. Deep ones, sharp ones, ones told in whispers and moans below deck. And as night approaches, you're about to descend into one of the most sobering, unsettling places aboard the Victory, the sick bay, where 18th century medicine performs miracles, and sometimes simply hopes for them. You brace yourself as you head toward the ladder leading below decks again, lantern light flickering against the narrow walls. The air grows warmer with each rung you descend, thicker, sharper, the unmistakable scent of sweat, tar, damp wood, and something metallic. You push deeper into the belly of the ship where laughter fades, orders dim, and the world narrows into the soft moans, quiet prayers, and weary footsteps of the place sailors hoped never to visit. The sick bay. You reach the orlop deck, the lowest inhabited level of the ship, where the ceiling is so low you find yourself ducking on instinct. The lanterns hang close, they're like warped by the smoky air. Sailcloth curtains form makeshift partitions, not for privacy, but to keep tools and bodies from rolling during heavy seas. This is the surgeon's domain, and it feels different from every other part of the ship. More intimate, more fragile, more raw. A man groans softly as you step forward. Another mutters incoherently, his voice drifting like tangled rope. The ship creaks above you, as if aware this space holds its most vulnerable. The surgeon stands bent over a table, simple planks laid across barrels. His sleeves are rolled, his apron, linen once white, is a battlefield of stains. He works with steady hands, stitching a wound with thread so coarse you wonder how the poor patient isn't screaming. But the man lies still, drugged on rum, laudanum, or sheer exhaustion. A mainstream historical fact settles heavily in your mind. 18th century naval medicine was astonishingly advanced in some ways, and horrifyingly primitive in others. Surgeons understood anatomy, could amputate limbs in under 2 minutes, used tourniquets effectively, and cleaned wounds with alcohol. But they also lacked anesthesia, antibiotics, and occasionally the luxury of calm seas. You step aside as a surgeon's mate brushes past with a bucket. You do not look inside the bucket. You don't need to. The soft, sloshing weight tells its own story. Nearby, a wounded sailor clenches his jaw as a mate splints his leg. Another man sits with a bandage around his shoulder, staring at nothing at all, his face pale as weathered parchment. He sees you looking and forces a crooked grin. "Don't worry," he says. "Hurts less than my wife's cooking." You laugh, a small shaky sound, and he chuckles before wincing sharply. Even in agony, sailors cling to humour the way the ship clings to the wind. You move deeper into the sick bay. The deck is sticky beneath your boots. Rum, blood, seawater, sweat, all mixed into a grim paste. You steady yourself with a hand against a beam, feeling the rhythmic vibration of the pumps through the wood. The ship is alive, working, breathing even down here. Farther in, curtains sway, revealing dim shapes. Men recovering, sleeping, dreaming, or simply waiting. The lantern light throws strange shadows across their faces. For a moment you stop breathing entirely, the emotion in the room thick enough to taste. A surgeon's mate approaches with a tray of instruments. You glance at it and immediately understand every terrifying story you've ever heard about old medicine. Bone saw, scalpel, forceps, heavy needles, cloth ties. The tools are simple, sharp, and brutally straightforward. Your quirky tidbit: some surgeons believe spiderwebs made excellent wound dressings. Not metaphorically, the real sticky stuff. Supposedly it helped clotting. You look at the surgeon's kit, then at the dark corners of the ship where spiders might lurk, and decide you'd prefer ignorance. The surgeon finishes stitching the man, on the table, and glances up at you. His eyes are tired but firm. "We do what we can," he murmurs, "and the sea does the rest." You nod, unsure what to say. What could you say? A shout breaks through the hushed murmurs. 2 men stumble in, carrying a younger sailor between them. His face is twisted with pain, his shirt is soaked with a spreading red stain. They lower him onto a second table, and the surgeon moves instantly. Calm, efficient. "Gunshot," he says. "Through and through. Get water, and the pincers." The men respond quickly. Someone tilts a lantern closer. The smell intensifies. You look away but can't help hearing everything. The hiss of poured alcohol, the sailor's sharp cry, the surgeon's low reassurance. "Steady, lad. Steady now." Historians still argue whether surgeons were respected, feared, or simply tolerated by the crew. Some were brilliant, some were butchers, some were both, depending on the day and how much the ship was rolling. But all carried an impossible burden, keeping men alive in a world designed to break them. You kneel near another patient. A boy, really, maybe 14. Powder burns mar his hands. His eyes blink open when he senses you. Will we sail again soon?" he asks. His voice is barely a whisper, carried by hope rather than strength. You nod gently. "Yes," you tell him. "The ship's already repairing herself." A ghost of a smile touches his lips before he drifts back to shallow sleep. You move deeper into the shadows at the rear of the orlop. Here, the surgeon stores water, rum, and the medical chest. A wooden box lined with bottles of tinctures, opiates, poultices, herbal remedies, and the occasional mystery mixture whose label simply reads tonic. Medicine was part science, part guesswork, part superstition. And here comes the scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether 18th century naval surgeons prevented more deaths than they caused. Infection rates were brutal. Survival depended on luck, ship cleanliness, the weather, and whether the surgeon had gotten enough sleep to make accurate cuts. You glance at the surgeon again, his brow furrowed in concentration, and silently vote in his favour tonight. You step back into the more open part of the sick bay just as the ship rolls. The lanterns sway, casting dizzying patterns on the canvas curtains. A wounded man moans in response. Others shift uncomfortably. Even pain respects the motion of the sea. The surgeon ties off a bandage with steady hands. "Get him water," he murmurs, and a mate hurries off. Then, noticing you, the surgeon lifts his chin slightly. "Go on," he says. "Fresh air helps the living more than the wounded." You nod, swallowing the lump in your throat, and begin climbing back toward the brighter decks above. The air lightens as you ascend, sounds grow clearer. You hear the creak of rigging, the rhythmic splash of waves, the distant call of an officer giving new instructions. Emerging into daylight feels like waking up. The world is still damaged, but it's alive, vibrant compared to the still, heavy air below. And as you step back onto the deck, you sense a shift in the crew. Relief, fatigue, a quiet camaraderie. But life aboard Victory isn't all storms, battles, and medicine. Sometimes the danger comes from inside, from rules, discipline, and the choices men make when cramped together for months at sea. And now, you're about to face the part of ship life every sailor fears more than storms, the punishments that kept order, and the men who enforced them. You step back onto the main deck, blinking into the light like someone emerging from a long tunnel. The sky looks too calm, almost suspiciously calm. The sails billow gently, the horizon sits quietly, and the crew moves with a tired ease that comes only after battle and repair have drained every ounce of adrenaline from their bodies. But beneath that calm is another energy, more subtle, more controlled, more dangerous in its own way. Discipline, order, the invisible spine that keeps a ship like Victory running. You've felt the ship's strength in storms and seen her fury in battle. But now you're about to witness the equally intense world of naval discipline, where the sea isn't the only thing men fear. A boatswain's pipe whistles sharply, slicing the still air. It's not the frantic shrill of battle commands. It's precise, measured, the kind of whistle that gathers attention instantly. Men straighten. Conversations stop mid-sentence. Even the gulls seem to blink and reconsider making noise. "Hear the hands aft," the boatswain bellows. You follow the gathering sailors toward the quarterdeck, your boots tapping against newly sanded planks. The mood shifts, quiet, tense, expectant. Not everyone knows what's happening, but everyone senses something is. In a floating city of 800 men, rumours travel faster than wind. A small circle forms. The officers stand with their formal posture, jackets neat, hats level, expressions carved from stone. The captain steps forward, his presence calm but unmistakably heavy. "Bring the prisoner," he says. 2 Marines appear with a sailor between them, a wiry man with salt-stiff hair and a defiant tilt to his jaw. His shirt is torn, his wrists are bound. The murmurs ripple through the crowd. You lean in slightly, catching a whispered explanation. "Caught drunk on watch. Second offence. Nearly let the foretopsail run loose." You wince. On land, drunkenness might earn a scolding. At sea, a loose topsail in shifting wind could destroy rigging, snap masts, or kill men. On a warship, mistakes have teeth. A mainstream historical fact rises quietly in your mind. The Royal Navy was infamous for its strict discipline. Punishments weren't optional, they were foundational. Without order, a ship became a wooden coffin drifting toward disaster. You watch as the captain reads the charges. His voice is even, controlled, almost weary. Discipline wasn't cruelty here. It was survival. He signals the boatswain's mate. "Flog him." The words drop like stones into the silent deck. A thick hush sweeps over the crew. Some men look away. Others stare directly, refusing to break the old tradition that punishment must be witnessed so its lesson doesn't need repeating. The prisoner is tied to the grating, his shirt stripped away, muscles taut. The boatswain's mate steps forward with the dreaded instrument, the cat-o'-nine tails, 9 knotted cords attached to a handle, designed not to kill, but to leave marks that memory won't forget. Your stomach knots. This isn't battle fury, this is methodical. The boatswain's mate lifts the cat. The ship seems to hold its breath. Swish. Crack. The sound slices the air, sharp as lightning. The sailor grunts, shoulders straining. His fingers clench the grating. You feel the entire crew tense with him. Some flinch, some stare straight ahead, some shut their eyes, but they don't leave. They can't. Discipline is communal, not private. Another lash. Another. The boatswain's mate strikes with practiced consistency, neither cruel nor gentle, a rhythm, a sentence being carried out. He pauses only to adjust his grip, as if this act is simply another duty like tying a knot or reefing a sail. Your quirky tidbit. Sailors sometimes tucked thin strips of cloth or rope under their waistband so they could bite down during floggings. Not to muffle the sound, no one cared if you cried out, but to avoid cracking teeth. You glance at the prisoner's clenched jaw and silently hope he prepared. After the ordered lashes, the captain lifts a hand. Enough. The boatswain's mate steps back, breathing hard but composed. The Marines untie the sailor and help him stand. His face is pale, but he stays upright. A stubborn, painful victory in itself. The captain's expression softens almost imperceptibly. See the surgeon, he says, and return to duty when he allows it. And just like that, the ritual ends. The crew disperses quietly, each man carrying the same message back to his tasks. Discipline keeps the ship alive. You stay still for a moment, letting the air settle. The deck feels different now, heavier, somehow wiser. Historians still argue whether naval punishments were necessary or excessive, whether they enforced order or crushed morale. The truth, probably both. Sailors complained loudly about discipline, yet most agreed the ship would fall apart without it. In a world where storms and cannons waited around every corner, order was the only defense humans could control. But discipline wasn't only about punishment, it was also structure, routine. The subtle rituals that kept men sane, shared meals, singing shanties during heavy labour, carving scrimshaw on quiet nights, mending clothes while telling exaggerated stories about sea monsters the size of small islands. And then there were the moments men lived for. Shore leave. The promise of solid land, warm food, and the freedom to stretch your legs without worrying the ground might suddenly tilt sideways. And as Victory adjusts her course toward the nearest port, you feel the crew around you shifting from somber reflection to cautious excitement. Because soon, very soon, you're stepping off this wooden world and into the noisy, unpredictable chaos of life ashore. The promise of land changes the ship long before the shoreline appears. It creeps into the air like warmth after winter, quiet at first, then unmistakable. Men move with lighter steps. Conversations bubble up between tasks. Even the gulls circling above seem to caw with extra enthusiasm, as if announcing, "Land is near, lads. Get ready to misbehave responsibly." You stand by the rail, watching the horizon brighten. The sky's clear now, the sea gently rolling, none of the storm's fury, none of battle's choking smoke, just clean wind, chattering rigging, and that subtle, giddy anticipation humming through the decks. Someone behind you mutters, "Smell that? That's land in the wind." Another replies, "No, that's Jenkins who hasn't washed since Gibraltar." They both laugh. Spirits are shifting. Rules will loosen. Just a little. And men who've been living in tight quarters for months will finally taste air that hasn't bounced off 800 other humans first. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. Shore leave wasn't just a break. It was essential for morale. Sailors needed land like lungs need oxygen. A ship could run on discipline and rum only so long before men began dreaming of mutiny, dry sand, or any surface that didn't swing underfoot. You look toward the bow, where the first lieutenant squints through a glass. "We'll anchor before dusk," he calls. "Stand by to furl the sails." A cheer rises from the crew, not wild but deeply felt. Even the officers hide small smiles. As the shoreline grows, details sharpen. A bustling harbour, masts clustered like a wooden forest, smoke curling from chimneys, tiny figures moving along the docks. After months of nothing but blue water, the sight is borderline overwhelming. Land looks impossibly solid, almost suspiciously so. Are you sure it's not moving? You feel the ship slow as sails are eased. Men swarm the rigging like jubilant spiders, tying, hauling, singing under their breath. The ocean gives one last friendly heave beneath Victory and then anchor splash. A deep, metallic ka-thunk. A long chain rattling out into green water. You're here. Boats are lowered. The smell of land grows stronger, earthy, smoky, full of baked bread, livestock, and questionable decisions waiting to happen. You descend into the jolly boat with a dozen others. The waves lap softly, the boat rocks. But when it touches the dock and you stand, your legs betray you instantly. You sway, you wobble, you nearly fall on your face. The sailors laugh because every one of them has done the first steps on land dance. Your body has spent months learning the language of a moving world. Now, suddenly everything is still, and your legs are confused. A quirky tidbit. Sailors often staggered so badly upon return that locals thought they were already drunk before even reaching a tavern. In some cases they were, but mostly they were just recalibrating. You straighten yourself and take in the dock. People bustle everywhere. Vendors shout about fresh fish. A woman balances a basket of bread on her hip. Dock workers eye the ship with open admiration. A small child tugs at her mother's sleeve and points at the Marines with wide-eyed awe. The sailors disperse quickly, moving in small groups like excited schoolchildren set loose on a field trip, with slightly more tattoos and significantly worse hygiene. You follow a pair of them toward a tavern marked by a swinging wooden sign carved with an overly friendly seahorse. The smells hit you first. Roasted meat, yeast, smoke, and humanity. Lots and lots of humanity. The tavern is dim, warm, loud. Exactly what sailors crave. Inside, men crowd tables, slamming mugs, laughing with wild relief. Someone begins singing, a shanty you recognize, though half the lyrics have been replaced with creative anatomy references. A sailor nudges you. "Come on," he grins. "First drink's on me, unless I change my mind." You find a seat as tankards thump onto the table. The beer is warm, slightly sour, but absolutely heavenly after months of grog and stale water. You sip, savouring the taste of not the ocean. Your shoulders relax more in one moment than they have in weeks. At a nearby table, a group of sailors gamble with dice. One claims he can predict the roll by reading the spirits in the wood grain, a trick historians still argue was talent, superstition, or cheating. You suspect it was all three. A pair of Marines swap dramatic retellings of the recent battle. One reenacts a cannon firing using only his eyebrows and a spoon. The cartographer sitting next to you quietly sketches the room on a scrap of parchment, his lines delicate, lovely, and absolutely capturing the chaotic joy. Outside, the harbour hums with life. Ships load and unload. Horses clop along cobblestones. Children dart between crates. Vendors hawk oranges, actual fresh fruit, something sailors crave like treasure. You buy one, peel it, and nearly melt into a puddle at the taste. It's bright, sweet, alive. Your tongue thanks you. Hours slip by in this warm, noisy escape. Shore leave isn't just relief, it's remembrance. Men remember who they are off the ship, who they were before storms and battles shaped them. They sing, they argue, they dance poorly, they breathe, but shore leave has a clock, always. You eventually hear the boatswain's call echo faintly through the streets. All hands, return to ship. Groans ripple across the tavern, tankards empty, coins clatter, stories are left unfinished, goodbyes are called. You step out into the cool evening air, lanterns glow along the docks, the Victory waits offshore, her silhouette majestic against the twilight. Even battered, even tired, she looks powerful, like a queen calling her children home. You board the boat with the others, the shore shrinking behind you. The sea rises gently, welcoming you back, and when your boots hit Victory's deck again, the ship creaks softly, as if acknowledging your return. Life aboard begins again the moment shore leave ends, and tomorrow you'll witness another world. Entirely, the shipwright's realm where the Victory is mended, reshaped and reborn when age and battle wear her down. The ship smells different today, not of sweat, powder or sea brine, but of sawdust. Fresh, clean, golden sawdust, drifting like soft snow through the still morning air. The scent hits you the moment you step onto deck and you breathe it in deeply. It's warm, earthy, comforting, in a way that makes you realize just how badly the Victory needs this next part of her life. Repairs, deep repairs, dry dock repairs, the shipwright's touch. The officers pace with purpose, the crew moves with a peculiar blend of fatigue and excitement, and you stand at the rail, watching as the harbour workers guide HMS Victory slowly, majestically, toward the massive stone walls of the dry dock, an enormous rectangular chamber with gates that will close behind her like the jaws of some ancient sea creature. The water swirls gently as the ship enters. Ropes sling from dockhands to sailors. Orders fly. The ship settles between the stone walls with the grace of something that has done this many, many times before. A mainstream historical fact floats calmly into your mind. Warships of this era spent years of their lives in dry dock. Wood demanded constant care. Tar had to be reapplied. Hulls needed scraping, caulking, sealing. Without regular maintenance, even the strongest ship would rot into an expensive pile of driftwood. The gates close behind you with a heavy echoing thud. Then the pumps begin. Massive machines, powered by teams of men, start pulling water from the basin. Slowly, inch by inch, the waterline drops. The hull emerges from the murk like the body of a leviathan rising from the deep. You've seen the Victory above water, you've touched her deck, you've walked her ribs. But nothing prepares you for the sight of her entire hull towering beside you, huge, curved, tar-dark, scarred by battle, streaked with sea slime, mottled with barnacles clinging like stubborn parasites. She looks ancient, proud, worn, alive. "Strip her," a shipwright calls, and the dry dock erupts into motion. Men swarm the hull with scraping irons, chipping away barnacles as big as thumbs. Others heat caulking irons, melting tar into long seams between planks. Some carry fresh oak timbers, massive pieces curved like the boughs of long-dead trees, ready to replace ribs and planks too weakened by age or cannon fire. You step closer to the hull, craning your neck. The ship looms impossibly tall now, her keel resting on massive wooden blocks. You can see every curve, every plank. The lower hull is copper-sheathed, a Revolutionary-era innovation. Thin plates of copper hammered along the bottom to keep shipworms from devouring the wood. A quirky fact strikes you. Shipworms aren't actually worms. They're clams, voracious wood-eating clams that once threatened to consume entire fleets. The copper sheathing saved ships like Victory from becoming floating, buffets for marine mollusks. You reach out and touch the copper plate near your shoulder. It's cool, ridged, pitted by the sea. Shipwrights nearby pry off damaged sections, tossing them into carts with dull, metallic clatters before riveting fresh sheets in place. Above, a gang of workers dismantles the rigging. Ropes fall in thick coils. Blocks descend like small wooden comets. The masts themselves, those towering giants you once gazed up at with awe, now seem almost vulnerable, lying stripped and bare, their rigging removed, their yards lowered. One shipwright passes by you, wiping sweat from his brow. "Wood always tells a story," he says. "You listen close enough, she'll tell you where she hurts." You nod, even though you don't know how to listen properly, but these men do. They tap planks with hammers, listening to the sound, tight or hollow, healthy or rotten. They smell the wood, checking for fungus. They run hands along curves to detect subtle warps. Historians still argue whether shipwrights were artisans or engineers. Truth is, they were both. Sculptors of the sea, mathematicians of curves, doctors for wooden titans. You wander toward the bow, where the figurehead, her proud carved warrior face, has been scaffolded so carvers can repair chips and cracks. One man gently sands her cheek, with a tenderness you wouldn't expect aboard a warship. "She's taken a beating," he murmurs, "but she'll look fierce again." You move aft toward the stern, admiring the beautiful ornate carvings, scrollwork, gilded flourishes, windows that gleam like jewels. These are cleaned, polished, touched up with paint as workers restore the ship's dignity one brush stroke at a time. Below, inside the hull, the carpenters replace cracked ribs with fresh oak. You watch them lever massive beams into place using ropes, pulleys, and pure stubbornness. The new timbers glow pale and creamy beside the older, darker wood, like new bones grafted into an ancient skeleton. You quietly marvel at the skill. No power tools, no computers, just knowledge passed from master to apprentice, muscle honed by years, and a deep understanding of how living wood behaves. One carpenter grins at you as he swings a mallet. "Ships are like people," he says. "Patch 'em up right and they'll sail forever." Outside again, you watch shipwrights boiling pitch in great iron cauldrons, the steam rising in fragrant waves. They dab oakum into seams, rope fibers soaked in tar, then seal it with hot pitch. The sound of caulking irons tapping along the hull becomes a rhythm, steady, comforting, tap, tap, tap. The sound is hypnotic, the heartbeat of healing. Above, riggers replace damaged shrouds, hauling coils of new rope up the masts with rhythmic chants. The whole dry dock becomes a symphony of hammering, scraping, shouting, soaring and chanting, an orchestra dedicated entirely to resurrection. You walk beneath the ship's great shadow, feeling small but honoured. This is the hidden world behind every glorious naval battle, the labour, the craftsmanship, the endless care that keeps a ship seaworthy. A shipwright leans toward you and says, "Remember, battles make legends, but repairs make history." You follow his gaze upward. The Victory stands proudly once again, her hull cleaned, her planks tightened, her copper fresh, her scars turned into stories. Soon she'll float again. Soon she'll catch wind again. Soon she'll return to the sea, reborn. And waiting on that deck, waiting in those masts, waiting in her timbers, is a legacy that belongs not just to the ship, but to a man whose name still echoes through history, a man whose presence still lingers in the creaks, the decks, the very bones of Victory. Horatio Nelson. He's next. Dry dock fades behind you as HMS Victory returns to the open water, her hull gleaming, her masts standing proud once more. Fresh tar scents the air. New rope fibres scratch gently under your fingers. The ship feels lighter, reborn, almost eager. And as she glides across the calm sea, a quiet reverence settles over the deck. Not spoken, not ordered, just felt. Because this is Nelson's ship, and whether you believe in hauntings, legacies, or simply the power of human stories, you sense something unmistakable. Horatio Nelson still walks here. You wander toward the quarterdeck where the horizon stretches vast and empty. Long shadows spill across the planks. The wind hums softly through the rigging. The deck creaks with that familiar living rhythm. You breathe it in, and for a moment you almost expect a slight, sharp-eyed man in a gold-trimmed coat to appear beside you. The officers speak of him in low tones. The sailors too. His name carries weight, respect mixed with affection, and maybe a little awe. A mainstream historical fact settles gently in your thoughts. Admiral Lord Nelson commanded HMS Victory at the Battle of Trafalgar, where he secured one of Britain's most famous naval victories. His tactics were daring, unconventional, and at times downright insane by traditional standards, but they worked. They shattered the Franco-Spanish fleet. They changed naval warfare, and they cost him his life. You approach the spot on deck marked subtly in the planks, a golden plaque indicating where Nelson was struck by the musket ball that would end his days. You kneel, fingertips brushing the warm wood. The breeze stiffens as if the ship herself recognizes the moment. This place feels sacred, not because of battle glory, but because of human fragility. You stand again and move toward the great cabin, where Nelson lived, planned, wrote orders, and paced through long nights. The door creaks softly as you step inside. Light filters in through the stern windows, casting rippling reflections of the sea across the polished table, where maps once lay spread wide. The air is still, almost too still. Nelson's desk holds an inkstand, quill, and a few sheets of parchment weighted by brass dividers. A small telescope rests on a side table. You imagine him standing here, frail, one arm missing, one eye gone, body battered from years of service, and yet more alive in spirit than most men ever become. Historians still argue whether Nelson was a genius or simply lucky, whether his charisma inspired men to the impossible, or whether his boldness bordered on reckless. But every sailor on Victory seemed to share the same opinion. They would follow him anywhere. You trail a hand across the desk's polished surface. The lantern above sways gently, casting warm light across the room. It's easy to picture him leaning over charts, tapping the table thoughtfully, whispering commands to aides. His presence feels woven into the wood, the ropes, the grain of the ship itself. You walk toward the stern windows. The sea glitters below, endless and serene. Nelson spent hours here, staring out, planning maneuvers, wrestling with decisions no man could take lightly. You wonder what he thought, if he feared, if he hoped, if he doubted. People often forget legends were just people who happened to face extraordinary circumstances. A quirky tidbit floats up. Nelson wrote many of his letters lying flat on his back because the motion of the ship made him nauseous when sitting or standing for long periods. Yes, the great naval hero got seasick. You smile, because somehow that makes him feel even more human. You step through the cabin into the adjoining day quarters. The floorboards creak softly under your weight. A series of paintings hang on the wall, portraits of naval officers, landscapes of battles, ships drifting in stormlight. Some originals, some recreations, all reminders of the world Nelson shaped. There's a hush here, not lonely, not empty, peaceful. Then you notice something small on a side shelf, a miniature flag in a glass case, the famous signal flag that flew during Trafalgar. England expects that every man will do his duty. Even without its bright colours, even without wind filling its fabric, those words whisper across the room. Duty, courage, sacrifice. They resonate in the warm glow of the lantern, in the rhythmic sway of the ship, in your own chest as you stand there absorbing the weight of legacy. Outside again on deck, voices murmur around you. Stories ripple through the crew like currents beneath the hull. Nelson walked here before breakfast. He touched that rail before battle. He spoke to Hardy right over there. His last words, "Thank God I have done my duty." Some of these tales are true, some are embellishments, some are stories retold so often they no longer need facts. They're part of the ship's mythology. Another sailor passes you and nods at the deck beneath your feet. "She remembers him," he says quietly. You nod. "You really think so?" "Aye." He taps the planks. "Timber takes in more than nails. It takes in people." You stand silently after he walks on, letting those words sink in. The Victory creaks, a low, mellow groan like an old woman stretching her back. Maybe she does remember. Maybe she carries Nelson's stride in her timbers, his plans in her planks, his breath in her sails. And now, as twilight softens the edges of the world, the deck glows warm, lanterns flicker to life, and the ship gently rises and falls with the evening swell. It feels like the right time, the perfect time to wander the ship one last time. Because after storms, battles, repairs, shore leave, and legends, there is still one more circle to close, your final night aboard HMS Victory. Night settles slowly over HMS Victory, smoothing the horizon into a soft velvety blur where sea and sky blend without a seam. Lanterns flicker along the deck, casting warm pools of gold that sway with every gentle rise of the ship. The air is quieter now, no shouts, no cannons, no hammering, no tense whispers. Just the steady rhythm of water brushing the hull and the soft murmur of ropes rubbing against wooden blocks. You walk the deck alone, your boots tap lightly against planks worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Officers, sailors, carpenters, surgeons, powder boys, and men who lived and died long before you ever set foot here. Each step feels like you're walking through layers of memory, as if the ship herself is showing you everything she has been and everything she has carried. The sea breeze is gentle tonight, warm, salted. It brushes your cheeks like an old friend bidding you a slow, fond farewell. The sails overhead, tidy, trimmed, quietly restful, flutter like the breath of someone drifting off to sleep. You pause by the mainmast, resting your hand against the solid timber. It hums faintly beneath your palm, the vibrations of the ship's movement travelling up through your bones. Earlier, this mast towered above you like a monument of strength. Now, in the dark, it feels more like a guardian, watchful, calm, steady. You wander forward toward the bow. The figurehead glows softly in lantern light, her carved eyes staring forever into the distance. She's been restored, repainted, her edges smoothed and polished. But her expression carries centuries of storms and battles and silent nights just like this one. You swear she looks almost alive in the faint glow, like she's keeping vigil until dawn. A mainstream historical fact arrives quietly, like a soft feather drifting down. Sailors often slept on deck during calm nights, especially in warm weather. Hammocks below could be stifling, but up here, the open air, the gentle breeze, the rocking of calm seas, this was paradise, a different kind of peace, an earned one. You glance aft, and sure enough, a few sailors lie stretched out on the deck, hats over their eyes, murmuring softly to one another. Their voices carry hints of stories, ones about home, laughter, food, mischief, bad tattoos, or girls who promise to write. Someone quietly hums a tune. Another whispers a prayer not because he's afraid, but because it's simply what sailors do at the end of long days. A quirky tidbit drifts through your thoughts. Some sailors believed sleeping on deck brought good luck. "The stars will watch over you," they'd say. And tonight, with the sky so clear it's easy to see why. The constellations glitter brightly, as if someone polished the heavens just for you. You move to the helm. The wheel stands tall and elegant, its spokes gleaming faintly in lantern light. The helmsman hums a low tune as he keeps the ship steady. He nods politely at you, a small gesture of shared quiet. The compass glows faintly under its hood, needle steady, pointing a direction that feels symbolic, even if you don't know exactly where the ship is. Heading next. Historians still argue whether sailors truly loved their ships or simply depended on them. But standing here tonight, feeling the deck breathe beneath your feet, smelling the tar, hearing the whisper of canvas, seeing the lanterns sway, you understand? They didn't just serve the ship, they belonged to her. You settle onto a coil of rope, letting your legs relax. Your mind drifts through everything you've experienced aboard the Victory, the pounding storm, the thunderous broadside, the quiet horror of the sick bay, the laughter in the tavern, the artistry of the shipwrights, the lingering presence of Nelson, the heartbeat of the ship in every creak and groan. And now, this stillness. This moment feels like the ship exhaling after holding her breath for days. You exhale with her, letting tension melt from your shoulders. A sailor approaches, sits beside you, and says softly, "She's different at night, isn't she?" You nod. "Feels like she's dreaming." "Aye," he murmurs. "Ships dream of the sea, same as sailors." He stands, giving you a friendly pat on the shoulder before heading below. You stay a moment longer, listening to the quiet symphony of nighttime aboard a living legend. Your journey is almost over. You've seen her fury, her fragility, her strength, her soul. And now, in this final hush before dawn, she rocks you gently, like a cradle, inviting you to rest too. Wind down, 300 words. The sea softens around the Victory, waves smoothing into long, slow breaths that rise and fall beneath her hull. The lanterns sway in wider, lazier arcs, their warm glow spilling across the deck like amber paint. Everything feels slower now, softer. The ropes no longer creak, they sigh. The sails no longer flutter, they whisper. And the ship, after all she's shown you, seems to settle into a deep, peaceful slumber. You let your eyes follow the horizon where the dark sky thins into a gentle gradient, a quiet promise of dawn somewhere far away. The stars above shimmer like distant lanterns guiding weary sailors home. Their reflections ripple across the water, stretching into soft ribbons of silver that dance with each lull of the sea. Your body loosens, shoulders release, breathing deepens. The tension you carried without noticing melts away, absorbed by the ship's steady motion. Each exhale feels like letting go of another heavy thought. Each inhale feels like drawing in calm, cool night air, the kind that smooths the edges of your mind. You lean lightly against the warm timber beside you. The Victory rocks so gently now that it feels like the world is wrapped in a blanket, humming a slow lullaby meant only for you. Beneath your palm, the ship's heartbeat grows soft, a quiet, rhythmic pulse that drifts in sync with your own. The voices of the crew fade into murmurs. The lanterns dim. Even the sea seems to hush itself, careful not to disturb this final moment of stillness. So let your eyelids grow heavy. Let the last echoes of wind and water blur into a single soothing sound. Let the deck cradle you the way only an old, loyal ship can. Rest now. Your voyage is over.